And yet those flames now rage higher than I have ever seen in my lifetime. She now leads a government of shreds and patches, and we on this side of the House say that this country deserves better and she should do the decent thing and resign.
Thank you
very much, Mr. Speaker, and it's a pleasure to follow the Right Honourable Member for Birmingham Hodge Hill. Now, I don't agree with his conclusion in any sense at all, because I think it would be grossly wrong for us to have a general election. But I do agree with him when he talks about some of the very real problems that are existing in our country and which we have an absolute duty as a government to start to address properly, ruthlessly in many respects and thoroughly. And I'm delighted that my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, is already beginning that work, the honourable member for Hastings, and she's already looking at universal credit to make sure that we are delivering a system that is absolutely fair. Fair not just for the taxpayer, but fair for the person who comes to rely upon universal credit. And I agree with the right honourable gentleman. It cannot be right that we live in a country where if you are in work, you are relying on food banks. That is wrong. That is not the sort of country that I think we should have in 2019. And equally, I think we have a system which again can't be right, that when you're in need, you are given food vouchers and not often cash, which you also might need. But those changes are beginning to be made, and I think that's good and that's right. I think there is another problem, if I may say, Mr. Speaker. The government is undoubtedly set on the right course, but it's often being diverted because of Brexit. It has swamped almost everything that we want to do, and I know that we can do. But there's also a real democratic deficit that's opening up in our country. And I agree with my right honourable friend, the member for Plymouth Moorview, when he talks about the state of British politics and the extremism that is undoubtedly taking over. Now, anybody trying to suggest that the Labour Party hasn't been taken over by the far left is frankly living in fantasy land. We all know, we only have to go and look on social media if anybody's got any doubt about it. Look at the comments that are made from the far left, Momentum and all the rest of it. The whole tone of British politics has been grossly diminished, but also we all know about it. Let's try and be honest. There are many right honourable members sitting on the back benches opposite who are in fear of being deselected, who fear the far left all the time. And more importantly, this country should fear the far left, who've taken over the front bench of the Labour Party, and goodness help us if we were ever in a situation where they would go into government, because they would undoubtedly cause the most appalling damage, especially to our economy. And of course I'll take the extra minute.
Very grateful, Honourable Lady, for giving me. The problem that she's on at the moment, and the problem that she was there at the beginning of her speech when she talked about fairness, I would suggest it's not so much fairness as resources. There's plenty of resources in this country. It's the distribution of resources that's the problem. And that is why the honourable member there, the right honourable member there, is in the soup kitchens of Birmingham on a Sunday night, because of the inadequate fairness of distribution of resources in the UK. That's where the problem is. That's why people reach to Brexit. That's why people are looking for weird places on the far left, because of that issue.
Without analysis at all. The problem is that if we don't get the economy of our country sorted, if we don't have a good, strong economy, then we absolutely don't have the money to pay for the services that we absolutely need. We know we need to tackle the great problems, almost a crisis that we have in social care, but there are no magic money trees. And the great danger is, and I would say this given my views on Brexit, that if we don't get Brexit right, then, and we know what the consequences of Brexit is going to be, whichever way you cut it, because the Treasury analysis has told us, it's going to make our country's fortunes less prosperous. It is not going to be good for the economy of this country. But I do want to return, if I may, to this problem about democracy, Mr. Speaker, because I am concerned. I think everybody's almost given up on the Labour Party. But if I look upon my own party, we too have got to get it right. And I think the Prime Minister has done her best. I don't doubt that for one moment. But I have to say, she's had many opportunities, and honourable and right honourable members on both sides of this House have talked about it. I spoke about it earlier today. She had the opportunity at the outset to reach out, especially into the 48%, and to make sure that she formed her consensus at the beginning, working cross-party, because undoubtedly there was a time when we could get a consensus consensus. We could have got a majority in this place, but unfortunately she pandered to a part of my party which has been there for a very long time, banging on about Europe. In my opinion, they do not represent the moderate, one-nation, pragmatic Conservatives that I certainly, and a party that I certainly join, and unfortunately she has pandered to that side of my party, and with great harm to our party, because if we ever lose that centrist, sensible, moderate, pragmatic, one-nation conservatism, then we will not succeed in winning again, and especially amongst young people. So I hope the Prime Minister changes her tone. The problem, Mr. Speaker, is her deal. She wants to get Brexit sorted and deliver it. She has to change her deal. She has to rub out her red lines and work with everybody.
Laura Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think it's a pleasure to follow the honourable member for Broxtowe, although I must put on record that I do completely disagree with the lines that she peddled out about my party. Mr. Speaker, we all came to this place knowing that each of us have been given a mandate to represent the communities that elected us. No one party won the general election in 2017. But the Prime Minister was clearly able to command a functioning majority in the House of Commons, and we have all had to acknowledge that reality. I didn't expect much from a Prime Minister that had promised a dementia tax, more grammar schools and an end to the ban on fox hunting. But I did, Mr. Speaker, have some hope that there were at least one or two policy areas where we might be able to park our party politics and begin to address the issues that matter most to those communities we represent. For example, I know that there are honourable members of the party opposite who share my concerns about funding for our schools, and the Prime Minister included funding for our schools as a priority in her foreword to the Conservative Party manifesto in 2017, which also committed to a real terms increase in funding for our schools. And yet, this government replaced one unfair schools funding formula with another, leaving schools in Crewe and Nantwich amongst the lowest funded in the country. Cuts have meant that head teachers are using the pupil premium to keep their budgets afloat, and parents are being asked by cash-strapped schools to pay for teaching resources. Mr. Speaker, I also welcome the commitment to tackle unfair executive pay and to build a Britain in which work pays, to quote the Prime Minister. Yet while CEOs managed to scoop themselves an average 11% hike in their pay this year, ordinary working people's real wages remain lower than where they were in 2010, and millions of working families are set to be worse off under their deeply flawed universal credit system. During the 2017 election, I was pleased to hear the Prime Minister promise to fix what she admitted was a broken care system and bring a social care green paper. In July of that year, the government said, "We cannot wait any longer, we need to get on with this." By the time we got to November, they told us that it would be here by the following summer. By the time we got to the summer, they told us to expect it in the autumn, and then before the end of the year. Well, we're a long way from 2017 when it was first promised, and there's still no sign of a green paper. And in the meantime, Mr. Speaker, care providers in Crewe and Nantwich have been placed in special measures, care workers have all been ignored, and the elderly and most vulnerable in our communities have been neglected by this government whilst they pull themselves apart over Brexit. This government hasn't just failed people with the way it has handled the Brexit negotiations, they have failed on the economy, they have failed on our public services. They have been riding roughshod over Parliament, repeatedly ignoring the expressed view of this House. I am sure there are honourable members sitting opposite who will be deeply disappointed with this government's record. They get the casework, they see the effects of this government's policies and what effect that has on their constituents, and they should not vote against this motion today out of self-preservation. This isn't simply about the government pursuing policies that I disagree with or failing to meet my expectations. This is about a government that isn't even coming close to delivering on its own promises. And what's more, We have seen more than once that the Prime Minister cannot command a majority in the House, and we have got to break this Brexit deadlock. This government has failed our communities and left a trail of broken promises in their wake, and I think it's time we gave those we represent a chance to turn their back on these failed policies, just as this government has turned its back on their future.
Stephen Kerr.
It is a pleasure to follow the Honourable Lady, the member for Crewe and Nantwich, and I rise to make a short contribution to simply state that I have full confidence in this Conservative and Unionist government, and I have full confidence in my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister. She personifies duty. She is a patriot and a servant of our country and its people. She's a woman of integrity and continues to serve the national interest with all diligence, and is leading a government which is dedicated to serving our national interest. There should be no under illusions. She was given the toughest job ever handed to a peacetime Prime Minister. She has been asked to circle an impossible square, but I have every confidence that under her leadership we will honour the instruction of the British people and leave the European Union in an orderly and managed way. We must not lose sight of the real achievements of the last 9 years of Conservative-led government. The mess that Labour left, and they always leave a mess behind them, Mr. Speaker, is being cleared up. The deficit is down by 4/5. The public finances are being restored. The hard work of the British people is paying off. 1,000 new jobs have been created every single day of this government. Employment is at record levels, unemployment at a record low, and there is real growth in household earnings. We are delivering on our promise to make the United Kingdom the best country in the world to set up and scale up a business. We have the right approach.
But he also confirmed that it escapes me whether in the manifesto it also said we will increase food banks, increase child poverty and cut in education real time.
Absolutely not. We have the right approach to industrial strategy, the right approach to clean energy strategy, the right approach to new and evolving technologies. This government is tackling the grand challenges of our times. We are on the side of our people and our planet. We are rolling out the most important reform of welfare services ever undertaken, investing in our NHS for the future, and resolved never to compromise on the defence of the realm against the background of an evolving threat to our freedom. We have a proud record on delivering practical help to the poorest people on the planet. In my constituency, this government has delivered on a £90 million city deal, giving our city and district a bright economic future for all. And beyond this, Mr. Speaker, and this is core to who I am and what I stand for, we have a Prime Minister who believes in the Union, and it is heartfelt. Other people may have the words. She has the conviction, and our government is committed to strengthening the Union. And I would remind colleagues, and this we must never forget, the nationalists and the socialists sitting opposite are waiting in the wings. And we have a duty to our country to never allow them anywhere near the seat of government.
Vernon Coker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I wish the honourable member for Plymouth was still in his chair, still in his seat, because we'd have the clash of opinion that we want in this House when he sort of says to me and people like me on this side of the House that saying something about child poverty, saying it's an absolute horror to walk past people who are homeless on the street as we walk into this Parliament. The fact, as a matter of public policy, this government drives people to food banks, not as a charity, not as something that good people do as volunteering, but something that is public policy. I'll tell him something, if that's a hard left programme, I'll stand on that in my constituency in Gedling, and I'll stand on that across this country. We're not frightened of saying that, Mr. Speaker. We're not frightened of saying that we believe this country deserves better, and we're not frightened of saying that we can do better. One of the things that the government has to accept, and I really want to come on to Brexit, one of the things I just wanted to say that the government has to accept, and my honourable friend made the point earlier on, I accept that members opposite aren't people who are uncaring about homelessness, or I wouldn't suggest that for one moment. What I'm saying, and the indictment of the government, is that pupils in schools who cannot get the special needs support they want, the people in hospitals who cannot get the care that they want, these things don't land from the moon. These things don't just happen. They are as a consequence of the policies that people in this House vote for. I'm not going to give way because loads of people want to speak, and so it's only fair to them. It's only because of those policies that that happens. And that is the realisation that comes across the country. I'll stand on the record of what my honourable friend from the front bench has said is important for this country. I'm perfectly happy to do that. But what I will also do is I will list the voting records of every single member of the Conservative Party and list to the people of this country what they've actually voted for, because we see the consequences of those policies every single day. Let me just say this, Mr. Speaker. With respect to the Prime Minister, we are debating a no-confidence motion, and it is likely that this no-confidence motion will be passed. This no-confidence motion will be lost. Let me just say this, and this is the constitutional and political dilemma for this country. We are going, as a Parliament, to say we have confidence in a Prime Minister that we have no confidence in. It is a complete and utter constitutional fiasco. It is 230 members of Parliament, the majority was yesterday, and yet the Prime Minister carries on, clings on. The Prime Minister says she is the person to deliver a Brexit. There is a parliamentary majority, I think, for a sensible way forward. What there is not is a Prime Minister who can deliver that parliamentary majority. And that is the problem that she's got. She's in hot part of her party that stops her building that consensus across this party, across this Parliament. Let me also say this. It is as much, I just wonder what the result of the no-confidence motion would be if it were no confidence in the Prime Minister to be able to deliver the Brexit this country needs, or to take this country forward. That would be the question that would actually pose a real dilemma for many people, rather than a no-confidence motion more generally in the government. So let me say this. The Prime Minister needs to reach out. She needs to build consensus. She needs to start with our front bench, with other parties in this Parliament. And in that way, she may be able to bring the country together and take us forward in a united way.
Richard Drax.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm a former soldier, and in my military career, we were given an aim, and then we had an execution to carry out that aim. The government was given an aim. The aim by the people of this country was to leave the EU. The execution of that aim, sadly, has gone wrong for many reasons. I'm not going to stand here today and overly criticise my government, although I would say one point. I'd wish some members of our front bench would stop accusing the likes of me for possibly ruining a no Brexit. That is not my aim. The reason I voted against the government last night was because the deal was not in the national interest and did not deliver Brexit. It kept us half in, half out, with no one in the chair to actually stand up for our country, plus many other reasons, including the backstop. The problem we have, in my humble opinion, is there is a disconnect. I have heard many members, honourable members in this House on both sides, give their perfectly reasonable speeches in consequence to the vote last night, which was a huge defeat for the government. But what I'm hearing, there is no consensus in this House, in most cases, to follow through what the people of this country told us to do. We were told to leave the EU. And in the vote last night, which was a catastrophic defeat, 117 of my colleagues voted against the government. The rest of those, the majority who voted against the government, did so for a number of reasons. There were some who don't want Brexit at all. There were some who want a second referendum.
on that point?
There was someone who wanted general election. Yes, I'm delighted to give way to honourable friend.
Does my honourable friend share my concern on those that are asking for a second referendum? Why should anyone ever trust referenda or any electoral process if, when we're given a mandate to do something, we don't follow it through?
Well, I agree with my honourable friend, and in my short speech on Monday, I made that exact point. Why should any of us, honourable members in this place, go into our constituencies with our political manifestos and tell people this is what we're going to do, when quite clearly we don't do what we said we're going to do? Who on earth in this country is going to believe us? I don't think this is about people's personal views, and many personal views, which I respect in this House, hugely diverse and different, 650. And I suspect every member of this House has a view on something. But the people of this country, who we gave the vote to, have told us to execute it. And it is to leave the EU. Now, what to do next? Can I suggest to my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, that she gets back on her feet? And I do. I have great sympathy for her. She has been handed a can of worms, a very, very difficult issue, which no one, I would suspect, in this House could manage either better or worse. What I would say is that had she been firmer with the EU, and this is what we've got to do now, I believe, had we stood as a United Kingdom like a rock to say we want a deal, of course we do. We want to be your friends and your allies, but we want to be in charge of our destiny. I think the EU by now would have said, we hear you. You are one of our major trading partners. Of course we want to deal with you, remain friends with you. Because you are friends of ours, and they will continue to be so. So can I advise the front bench to go back to the EU as fast as they can? People say there's no time. The EU has a wonderful way of moving quickly, if indeed it needs to. To say we've had the voice of this House or home of democracy, I cannot get this deal through. We need to have far more flexibility from the EU than you're prepared to offer. For example, removing the backstop. I think then she can come back, get agreement on the House, and we can get on with this Brexit, which is antagonising millions of people around the country, as we all know.
Oh, my honourable friend.
I'm delighted to be waiting.
I would just like to ask my honourable friend this. How does he interpret what the Prime Minister said last night about reaching across to the other side of the House? Because if we are to take both sides of the House with us, bearing in mind that there are a majority of honourable and right honourable members in this House who are for Remain and not for Leave, does that not mean that she will end up with an even softer Brexit than the one that she has proposed?
Well, nothing would delight me more, Mr. Speaker, if every single MP in this House said, let's get behind the Prime Minister, let's deal with Brexit, let's get out of the EU while remaining a good trading partner with them and get on with our lives. Well, I am absolutely convinced this country will do well and prosper and flourish as an independent country. We were for many hundreds of years before we joined the EU, and when we leave, we will flourish. Of that I have absolutely no doubt. And I'd like to also inform my right honourable friend that I have a message from the Chief Whip this morning, who I asked to confirm that the date of March 29th is still very much government policy. I have it here in black and white that it is. Now, no one wants a no deal. I've been accused of being an extremist and this and that, and I want to crash out and all this cliff edge nonsense. I don't. But we've got to have a stick to wield to the EU if we are to negotiate properly. And if ultimately they can't give us a deal, yes, we leave on WTO terms, which most of the world trades on peacefully and effectively. It'll be bumpy, yes. Leaving a place after 44 years is going to be. But we will manage because we're a great country. And we will survive. We will. And we will flourish and do well. So can I not survive? Flourish is the word I used. But according to the doomsters, we're all doomed. I'm saying we will not be doomed. We will flourish. So, front bench, let's get on with it. Deliver.
Greeting, Mr. Speaker.
Speaker, it's a pleasure to follow the honourable member for South Dorset because, if I may say so, it's that level of detachment from the absolute reality of the complexity of the Brexit negotiations and what the Prime Minister is trying to achieve that has led to so many members being divorced from reality. Yes. The reality of the negotiations, the reality of the consequences for the people we represent, and the reality of the conditions that people are already living in this country. Because, Mr. Speaker, we will survive. There will still be food on the table. There will still be Mars bars and packets of crisps was not the promise made to people during the course of the referendum. They were promised something better. And just like the rats fleeing the sinking ship of the cabinet as they deserted, so the promises went with them. And now, Mr. Speaker, my constituents who voted leave are being offered something far less optimistic than the rosy pie-in-the-sky promises made during the referendum. But, Mr. Speaker, this debate is not about the referendum. This is about whether we have confidence in Her Majesty's government. And it is striking. Not only are there so few members coming along this afternoon to defend the government, so few have even bothered to talk about the government's record. There was one speech during the debate on the withdrawal agreement, Mr. Speaker, that I think captured perfectly why so many people voted to leave. And it was made by the honourable member for Bournemouth West. He said, "I think Brexit was a great cry from the heart and soul of the British people. Too many people in this country feel that the country and the economy are not working for them and that the affairs of our nation are being organised around a London elite. They look at the bankers being paid bonuses for their banks that their taxes help to rescue. They look at our embassies in the Gulf that are holding flat parties to sell off-plan exclusive London properties when they worry about how they will ever get onto the housing ladder. They worry that they may be the first generation who are not better off than their parents, and they want to see a system that spreads wealth and opportunity." Well, Mr. Speaker, what he neglected to say, and what so many people opposite won't acknowledge, is that every single one of those problems was made in Britain. Yes. It is this place that is responsible for the gross inequality of the country, and it is the party opposite that has prosecuted the policies that have led 500,000 children more living in poverty than when we left government 9 years ago. It's the party opposite that has left 4 million working people living in poverty. It is the party opposite that has pursued punitive benefit policies that leads to people not just sleeping rough on the streets of our constituencies, but sleeping rough on the doorstep to the entrances to this palace, literally dying under our feet, Mr. Speaker, and not a single bit of responsibility taken, and not a single offer of hope. And, Mr. Speaker, it is not just the most... I will give way.
The honourable gentleman for giving way. During the Remain campaign, both the honourable gentleman and I were on the same side of the debate. I'm sure he remembers then the right honourable leader of the opposition not turning up to events, not willing to contribute to the overall UK Remain campaign, and not playing his part to keep the UK in the European Union. So I asked my honourable friend, what is he going to do this time differently to get the right honourable gentleman to participate and take part in this debate?
Mr. Speaker, if I may say, this is not the afternoon for the honourable gentleman to lecture me about holding my leadership to account. This is an afternoon for him and every other member opposite to hold their rotten government to account for the policies that are making his constituents poorer and my constituents poorer. You know, we've heard a lot about the Leader of the Opposition this afternoon, Mr. Speaker. If they think he is as terrible as they have said, maybe they can explain why it is that, having confidently called a general election with the promise of a huge sweeping majority, so many Conservative members lost their seats. I will tell them why. Because when it comes to tackling the chronic housing crisis, the crisis in our schools, the crisis in the NHS, the crisis that hits people in their pocket, the Leader of the Opposition is more in touch with people in this country than the Prime Minister and the Tories opposite will ever be. That's the truth. I'll give way once more.
Indeed, for giving way. If that is the case, will the right honourable member explain why so many of his side, I think 173 MPs on your side, on the honourable gentleman's side, refused to back him in his leadership?
To the Privy Council, and I trust his note of appreciation to the honourable member for the Isle of Wight will be the internal post today. We're streeting.
If I may say, it's been a long time coming. And can I just say again, with some humility to the member opposite, this really is not the afternoon for members opposite to talk about motions of no confidence, because not only did more than half of their backbenchers declare no confidence in the Prime Minister and her leadership, this afternoon is about confidence in the government, and he should be defending the government's record. Finally, Mr. Speaker, it is not just about gross inequality and what is going on to the very poorest in our society. It is about the fact that the majority of people now, even those who believed 9 years ago that we had to tighten the belt, that things would be difficult and there were difficult choices to be made, and people accepted that and they voted in the way that they thought best. 9 years on, it is now the experience of people who use and rely on our public services that things are demonstrably worse now than they were 9 years ago. Our schools, less well funded than they were when Labour left office, with per pupil funding down by 8%, and teachers walking out of the profession in droves. 2.5 million more people waiting longer than 4 hours in accident and emergency departments, and the number of people waiting more than 2 months for cancer treatment doubled. And unbelievably, from a Conservative government, a situation where people in my constituency describe a state of lawlessness because they have cut the Metropolitan Police to the bone with more than £1 billion worth of cuts in funding. 21,000 police officers lost, almost 7,000 PCSOs and 15,000 police staff. Officer numbers at their lowest levels for 30 years and the highest rises in crime in decades. It is no wonder, Mr. Speaker, that this afternoon they don't want to stand up and defend the record of this government. It is not a record that they are able to defend, but it is now right, in fact it is past time, to acknowledge that the government has lost control of Parliament, lost control of the ability to govern, and have lost the confidence of the British people. It is time for members opposite to do the right thing and declare, as we will, no confidence in Her Majesty's government.
Double! Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it is a pleasure to follow the honourable member from for Ilford North. It is well documented, Mr. Speaker, that I have had my differences with the Prime Minister in recent weeks and months, and it was with regret that I found I could not support her deal through the lobbies last night and had to vote against it. But I can assure the House I will be voting against this motion of no confidence this evening, because I want to see a Conservative government to continue to be in office in this country. The Prime Minister has many qualities, and those qualities have come to the fore in recent times. People across the country admire her resilience, her fortitude, her determination. And I would join in saying that these qualities are great qualities that she has demonstrated. And I would, with respect, say that if she now takes those qualities and directs them towards the EU Commission, then her stock in this nation will rise dramatically, because the people of this country want to see our Prime Minister standing up to the EU and telling the EU what this country needs from these negotiations, and I would encourage her to do that. There is no doubt that the Prime Minister has been given an incredibly challenging job, but that job has been made all the harder by the behaviour of some members of this House who have sought to undermine her negotiating position time and time again. Those calling for a second referendum have completely undermined her position by making the EU believe that we could have a second vote to overturn the decision, and therefore making the deal unattractive in the hope that we would reject it. Those discounting no deal have undermined the Prime Minister's position in taking that off the table. Anyone in negotiations will say that no deal has to remain a position in any successful negotiation. And I find it very interesting that the front bench of the Labour Party have said that they would rule out no deal on the basis that it would be damaging to the country. Now, I don't think no deal would be that damaging to the country. It would be a challenge. But do you know what the businesses in my community tell me time and time again? That the thing they really fear is not no deal Brexit, but it is a Labour government. That is the thing that they are far more afraid of. And so I would say to the front bench, if you have discounted no deal on the basis it would be damaging to businesses in our country, would you now please discount a Labour government on the same criteria? Because that is what businesses up and down this country are wanting us to stay in government, to prevent the Labour government taking office. It is fair to say we are not where we want to be in these negotiations. But I absolutely back the Prime Minister in her position to say that we will continue to seek a consensus across this House to find a basis that we can renegotiate with the EU and come up with a deal that we can deliver for this country. And therefore tonight I will absolutely be backing the government. We need to deliver Brexit. We need to deliver the Brexit we promised the country in our manifesto, and then we need to move on to a domestic agenda to start delivering the changes that this country needs and is crying out for.
Savile Roberts.
It's an honour to follow the member for St Austell, Honourable Member for St Austell in UK, although I must admit I share none of his convictions, either in the qualities of the Prime Minister or in the virtues of a no deal. And, Mr Speaker, I thought something happened last night, and yet there has been too much point scoring, pantomime point scoring is continuing in this place. And last night I voted against the Brexit deal. And in doing so, I voted for the Prime Minister to change course. I voted for averting the damaging consequences of her deal. Now, it's now time to move on to a real solution to this Brexit mess. Parliament cannot come to an agreement on the way forward, so it's time for the people to decide on our European future. But one thing stands in the way. Labour has by now, at long last, satisfied one element of its conference policy and tabled a motion of no confidence. I will, of course, be supporting the motion of no confidence today. But if it fails to gain the support of the House tonight, the Labour Party must move on and satisfy the next element of its conference motion. It must move on to adopting a people's vote as its membership demanded. Let me be clear, Mr Speaker. As well as taking no deal off the table, we need to take no progress off the table too. Now, Plaid Cymru will reconsider its support if the Leader of the Opposition decides instead to embark upon an infinitely failing, hopeless series of motions of no confidence tabled on a rolling basis, when there is evident, and if there is evidence, that there is no hope of success, if those motions of no confidence have no chance of making a critical difference. All that would do would be to achieve further parliamentary paralysis, which is something nobody, I think, in this place, in all honesty, wants to see, certainly nobody outside. Mr Speaker, with all this in mind, those of us who oppose the British government's policy need to explain how to avoid a no-deal Brexit when there is seemingly no clear majority in normal binary voting systems that are the convention in the House of Commons. Several honourable members have offered credible solutions as ways of breaking the impasse, including my honourable friend, the member for Carmarthen East and Donegal. He has put forward a novel idea to ensure the House of Commons is able to reach a conclusion on a proposal. The answer could lie in the use of an alternative voting system. My party would always have a preference for a people's vote, and I believe in this method of voting, and with Labour's support, I believe it would be the most preferred option of members of Parliament across the House of Commons. The House of Commons, and I will give way.
Honourable Lady, if the result in that referendum was again to leave, would she be willing to respect the result the second time? And if the result was to remain, would she be happy with those on the leave side who call for a best of three?
What I am proposing here is a means for this place to find its way out of the present impasse in which we find ourselves. At present, we may be talking about indicative votes, but there may well be other ways. Now, we find ourselves in an unprecedented situation. The procedures which we have used in this place in the past look unlikely to find us out of the impasse in which we find ourselves. What I am begging of this place is to look at creative means for us to be able to move ahead. I, for my own party, will be moving ahead to propose, with part of that system which we may use, to propose a people's vote as the way ahead. But I will beg on all of us, because we have been criticised fairly outside of this place for not proposing ways forward. I would beg all of us that we do seek ways forward. I will not take any more time because I'm very much aware, as the member of a small party usually has very little time to speak, how valuable the time that we have is. So I will close with this. And I will say, the House of Commons has effectively taken control of Brexit policy. It's defeated, of course, let us remember this. This isn't just about a tit-for-tat on both sides. Defeated the British government's deeply deficient deal last night. Now, we must find a way to ensure a way of coming together for a conclusive decision in favour of a people's vote.
Thank you very much indeed. Marcus Jones.
Mr. Speaker, I rise this afternoon in support of the government and against this motion that has been put before the House today. In doing that, I will talk about the record of this government, and I will talk about the issue that has triggered today's vote, which is the Brexit vote we had yesterday. Just to put our record in context, everything that the Conservatives have done in government since 2010 have had to be framed in the context of the recession, the massive deficit and mess left behind by the Labour Party. And despite the mess that was left behind, the 6% drop in GDP, the 800,000 more people unemployed, under this Conservative Party, 3.4 million jobs have been created. We have record employment, record unemployment. We've provided 15 hours free childcare for disadvantaged 2-year-olds, 30 hours free childcare for working parents, the national living wage. We've cut income tax so that people now can earn double what they could nearly under the Labour Party before they pay income tax. We've not increased fuel duty for 8 years. We have now a situation where many more of our children are coming out of primary school with a far higher standard of reading and writing than was the case before. We have more doctors and nurses in our hospitals. We have fewer infections and people dying because of those in our hospitals. And we are putting £20 billion into the NHS and a 10-year plan for the NHS where we are putting significantly more money into mental health provision. Under the Labour Party in my constituency, they tried to close A&E and maternity, so they have not got the record that they state or think they have. And when you look at the situation, have we got anything right? No, we haven't got everything right in government. There is still a lot more to do. We need to make sure that we build on the money that we are now putting in, the extra resources we're now putting into the police force. We need to make sure we honour the commitment to halve and end rough sleeping. We need to make sure that we keep refining and get universal credit right, because it is the right thing to do to have a system that gets people into work. When we look at the alternative is more debt, more borrowing, and a leadership team that does not believe in this country and thinks more about other countries than they do of their own. Now, we're here because of the Brexit debate, and members opposite have done nothing today but talk about red lines. Whether you like what the Prime Minister put on the table yesterday or not, the red lines that she put down were based solely on the referendum that was voted on by the British public, and it was solely on manifestos that about 85% of the public voted for. And she has tried her best, despite problems across this House and people driving their own agenda. She has tried her best to get a deal that the House agree with. Clearly it doesn't. But what I would say to members opposite is that this House voted to give a referendum. The public voted for Brexit. We must deliver on that. People don't want a general election. They want us now to get on with the job, come out of the European Union and come together as a House to do that in a sensible way. They don't want a general election. They don't believe the Leader of the Opposition is a Prime Minister in waiting. They don't believe he can be a Prime Minister. I'm against this motion, and I will be proud to go through the lobby and back this government tonight.
Laura Pidcock.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. If ever there were an advert for why we need a general election and why we have no confidence in this government, it has been the speeches opposite today. They are so devoid from reality. Watching this crisis unfold, I have often been struck how the process is viewed by the people we represent. People in North West Durham and beyond voted Leave and Remain for a number of reasons. Feelings of being left behind by the establishment, of seeing their security dwindle, communities being abandoned. They were worried their rights were going to erode, that their businesses would close. Some wanted to take back control. Some wanted to be part of something bigger. All complex, individual reasons, but very few of them have been satisfied by the way this government has represented them in the negotiations with the EU. Instead, we are entangled up in the tensions between two factions of the Conservative Party, the hard right and the centre right, and the arbitrary red lines of the government. And we are in a shameful state. But it goes further than this. This government can now not govern, not just on our withdrawal from the EU. And that's not just a slogan. It generally reflects the position that we are in. Where are we at as a country? In the North East and in North West Durham, in fact, in all of our communities, people are suffering. Their pay does not cover the bills. The shambolic universal credit system makes them poorer, stigmatised and stressed. And after 8 years of austerity, this country is on its knees. An increasing number of people are homeless, many are destitute, and some, as has been mentioned by the fantastic contributions, are even dying in this system. Do teachers in this country have confidence in the government? Do nurses, doctors, firefighters, prison officers, those in private business waiting for a deal, those waiting for the brown envelopes from the DWP to say whether they have been sanctioned or not, those deemed fit for work who are ill, those who are homeless, the 1950s women, do they have confidence in this government? And I think not, because the reality is out there. And you know what? I hope it pricks the conscience of the 100+ Conservative MPs who decided that the Prime Minister was not fit to lead them just a few weeks ago, or similar numbers who agreed with us that the Brexit deal was a farce. Will you stand up as well for all of those people who are suffering? The speeches on the opposite side have been desperate. They are desperate to denigrate the Labour Party because they are scared of the powerful arguments of the Leader of the Opposition. And when members go through that lobby tonight to say that you have confidence in this government, they are voting for more chaos, more austerity. The members will be stepping over all of the children who do not have food in their bellies when they go to schools, stepping over the pensioners who can't afford to heat their homes, and stepping over the homeless people on their streets. It means you could not care less about them. This country, our communities, working people deserve so much better. We deserve a different direction, and fast. We need a general election, and get this lot out now.
Chris Phil.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In moving this motion of no confidence earlier today, the Leader of the Opposition claimed this was about delivering Brexit. But this Parliament, elected in 2017, was elected to perform that task. And both main parties, Labour and Conservative alike, stood on a manifesto of respecting the referendum result. And between the two of us, we got 82% of the vote. It's our responsibility now, together, each and every one of us, to find a way of making Brexit work for our country. And by claiming the only way to do that is by holding yet another general election, is an abdication of the individual responsibility that each and every one of us took upon our shoulders by standing as candidates in the 2017 general election. But the particular mendacity of the Leader of the Opposition in moving this motion, by claiming it would give him, if he won a general election, a mandate, is that he has absolutely no policy on Brexit at all. And given he has no policy, he couldn't possibly have any mandate to do anything were he to win a general election in the first place. He goes about the country in the north saying that he's in favour of Brexit. Yeah. He says to Remain-leaning constituencies in London and the south, he gives them the impression he's in favour of remaining. And he would collapse in a general election campaign under the weight of his own contradictions. He was asked time and time again last night, over the weekend, he was asked by a member of the SNP earlier to articulate his policy on Brexit, and he could not do so. He couldn't do so because he has no policy. It's up to all of us to pull together and work out a way of delivering Brexit sensibly.
Obviously,
he has policies. I think he has 13 policies on Brexit, not none. But thank you so much indeed.
Well, I'm grateful to the member for the Isle of Wight for clarifying that multiplicity of policies, which the Leader of the Opposition adopts at different times when he finds it convenient to do so. But I would also say to the government that They should listen after the vote last night. Clearly, it was the margin of defeat was not a small one. And if there's one thing, it strikes me, that needs to be changed in order to give this proposal a chance of passing, it is obviously the backstop. And my request or my advice to the government is that we do need to speak to the European Union about introducing legally binding changes to that backstop in order to render the withdrawal agreement acceptable to this House. And I would just ask the government to speak to the European Union in the coming days on that topic. We've also heard a great deal from members opposite about the government's record more generally, in particular from the member for Ilford North and the last speaker as well. I am proud to defend this government's record over the last 9 years. I heard education mentioned, and it was, of course, the Right Honourable Member for Surrey Heath, who I see in his place, who, as Education Secretary, introduced reforms. Absolutely. Introduced reforms, which now mean that more children than ever before are attending good and outstanding schools. That isn't my judgment, it's not the government's judgment, it's the judgment of Ofsted, and it's the quality of education our children receive that really matters. I will again in a moment. Now, I heard the NHS mentioned as well, of course a vital institution that we all cherish. And contrary to the threats made or the dire warnings issued at various general elections about how the NHS is unsafe in Conservative hands, we've heard announced just a few weeks ago the biggest ever increase in funding for the NHS, £23 billion a year in real terms. And we're seeing that in Croydon already, with a brand new accident in emergency just opened at Croydon University Hospital, which I visited just last Friday. Twice the size of the old one, a fantastic facility funded by the Department for Health and by this government. And when it comes to poverty and inequality, members opposite will be aware that absolute poverty has gone down. They'll be aware that income inequality has never been lower. They will be aware that the way you combat poverty is by creating employment, and employment is at a record level as well. And finally, Mr. Speaker, I am proud that it's a Conservative government which has increased the minimum wage by 38% since 2010. 38%. That is significantly higher than the rate of inflation, and goes to show this government is on the side of working people on low incomes, and I will be proud to support it in the division lobbies this evening.
John Woodcock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to follow what I will say was a textbook speech from the member, from the honourable member opposite. I have to say that I agreed with a great deal of what the Leader of the Opposition said in his opening speech, and certainly with many of the passionate contributions from my honourable friends on this side. The last 8 years of Conservative or Conservative-led government have indeed put great strain on communities like ours. The very fabric which is holding our public services together, the voluntary sector, has been stretched, and that has had an intolerable impact on many, many people's lives because of wrong decisions that were made by this government over these recent years. We have to get justice for the WASPy women. We have to put schools and hospitals on a better footing. And my goodness, in my constituency, we've got to sort out our train system, which is even at the worst end of what Northern Rail has been inflicting on passengers. And we are now indeed in a dire situation after the monumental defeat of yesterday. This country is in a national emergency. But what, Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid to say, makes this almost uniquely serious a situation for the country is that this cannot be a motion of no confidence in a vacuum. Yeah. This is a general election that would give the public a choice between a government that is struggling to govern and a Leader of the Opposition and Shadow Chancellor who, I am afraid to say, I have not changed my view that they are simply not fit to hold high office. The public, Mr. Speaker, deserve so much better than this choice in the broken political system that they are being given. They deserve leadership to right the terrible injustices that have been inflicted on our communities. They deserve leadership to lead the public out of this Brexit mess, and they deserve a government and leadership that they can trust to keep them secure. Aside from the leader of the opposition's past positions, of which there has been much discussion today, let's focus just for a moment on the nuclear deterrent, an issue, of course, central to my constituency, which I have spent many years as an opposition MP working with the Honourable Member for Gedling, the Shadow Defence Secretary, to maintain the Labour Party's policy on the face of it being sensible. But I have to ask my colleagues, do we really think that with the crisis of spending which any future Labour government is going to inherit, do we really think that we would maintain a policy that will spend many billions of pounds on a future submarine system which the Leader of the Opposition will have rendered useless on day one by saying he would never ever use the deterrent? It is just not a serious proposition, Mr. Speaker. So, with a heavy heart, I have to tell the House that I cannot support the no confidence motion tonight. And some of my friends mutter disgrace. I hear some of them tutting. I have to say that many of them have privately said, thank God that you have got the freedom to actually not support this, because they are wrestling with their consciences of wanting desperately a Labour government, but knowing that the leader of their party is as unfit to lead the country as he was when they voted against him in the no confidence motion of the party those years ago. Now, the Prime Minister... Yes, I'll give way.
You've had yours, gentlemen, for giving way. And I can understand his dilemma. What does he think the effect would be in his area if we were to abandon the nuclear programme that this country has pursued for decades?
Thank the Honourable Gentleman for that question. The economy of Bowen Furnace, we are a shipyard town. It is woven into our history. There are more than 9,000 people employed directly in my constituency now, many, many more dependent on this, and it is a chance that, unfortunately, they cannot afford to take with the Leader of the Opposition. The Prime Minister has to reach out, more than she has done in the chamber today. She has to unshackle herself from the hardline Brexiteers who have led her down the wrong path. But I will commit every day to give my constituents, to try to give them the chance of better leadership for this country. And while we are in this impasse, I will do my very best to deliver for them. I've been pleased to work with the government to unlock the Marina project, which is absolutely vital to the future of our local economy. I'm working with them constructively on the submarine programme, which is bringing great prosperity into the area. Much more is needed, but I will go on doing that, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is an enormous honour to follow a speech as brave as the one that has just been given by the honourable gentleman. And I have completely mentally ripped up what I was going to say and will say something, I hope, in response. I have enormous respect for the honourable gentleman and always have done. And I would like to say that members across this House as a whole work extremely hard to represent their constituencies as they see fit. I have been very impressed since I got here by the hard work and dedication of Labour members. I have enjoyed the cross-party working in which I've been involved, most particularly in the justice sphere, where the Justice Select Committee has made real change to people's lives, and also in the area of early pregnancy loss and baby loss. We've worked cross-party and made real differences. And I hope that my remarks this afternoon will be taken in that context. I'm not going to speak up for the deal, and I'm not going to speak up for the PM, though I do strongly support both. I am, unusually for me, going to talk about personalities, as the honourable gentleman did. The Right Honourable Member for Islington North has been an anti-war and anti-nuclear campaigner all his life, as far as I know. He'd prefer to live in a republic. He supports Hamas and the IRA and various other unfashionable organisations around the world. He has voted against his whip more often than any other Labour member.
He has been monitored by MI5 for 30 years and by Special Branch for 20 years. For decades, because they are worried that he will undermine parliamentary democracy. He describes Karl Marx as a great economist, and the Prime Minister, who is never one to attack personally, mentioned his remarks following the Skripals attack in her own speech. I think what we do need to focus on is his position on Europe. He opposed joining the European Community in 1975. He opposed Maastricht and Lisbon. He wants to be free of EU rules on state aid and industry. The honourable gentleman for Hayes and Harlington, who supports him in this place, the chap who threw the little red book on the table in the first budget for which I was an MP, the gentleman who thinks that the honourable member for Tatton should be lynched and he wanted to assassinate Mrs Thatcher, he says that he would only back a second referendum if the option to remain were not present. Oh. This is not acceptable, Mr Speaker. We need some clarity from the opposition at this important national point. We need to know what the policy is. I was a civil servant, as you know, Mr Speaker. I find it very easy to work cross-party, but not with this leadership, like the honourable gentleman who spoke before me. It was clear to me, I joined the civil service in 1997. One of the reasons I became a Conservative MP is because I saw that the quality of decision-making improved in 2010 under the coalition government. But that doesn't mean that there isn't good on the opposition benches, and we need to harness that. However, in agreement with the honourable gentleman, I don't think anybody can have confidence in the current Labour leadership. And for those reasons alone, and for all the many good reasons mentioned by my colleagues, I have complete confidence in this government.
Harry Black.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And since we appear to be in a political twilight zone in this place, I feel the need to say a few home truths. I have never had confidence in this government whatsoever, whether that be Brexit, whether that be social security, whether that be immigration, and whether that be pensions. I have no confidence in them, and I can't believe that anyone does have confidence. I have no confidence in the Prime Minister, because this is a Prime Minister who knew what the outcome of this vote on her deal would be, so much so that she delayed it, and then came back and acted like it was a surprise that it failed. All that happened is she wasted a month, and she did this in the full knowledge that time is running out. Now, regrettably, I actually have to say the same about the Leader of the Opposition, and I do say this sincerely. I can't get my head around how the honourable member, the right honourable member, has delayed calling for a vote of no confidence. He delayed it in the initial farce. He failed to support the vote of no confidence from SNP and other parties. And I find myself being left asking the same question. What good did it do? Because all that's happened is this lot have had another month in power. And I find myself questioning his logic of going, I'm waiting for the perfect moment, the opportune moment. Because I think we'll find at the end of this debate that that moment has actually passed. Now, I sincerely hope that the right honourable member, the right honourable member and Leader of the Opposition will eventually come clean about whether he thinks this should be taken back to the people or not. Because this deadlock evasiveness cannot last, it cannot continue. People deserve better. And to be honest, we all deserve a better opposition. The only thing that I have any confidence in, quite frankly, Mr Speaker, is the people of Scotland. The wealth of talent, the wealth of intellect, the wealth of compassion that we have to offer the world. And I have no doubt that people in Scotland will be watching this entire farce back home and finding themselves reaching the conclusion that the only thing they can have confidence in is the ability of our country to look after ourselves a damn sight better than this place ever has. And if the government and the Prime Minister is truly meaning that she wants to reach out and cross-party support, then a good start would be listening to the will of the second largest nation in this United Kingdom and giving us the respect that we are due.
Best. David Duquette.
Thank you much, Mr. Speaker. I'm delighted to follow the honourable member for Paisley and Renfrewshire South. It's great to see her in her place. And might I say that, Mr. Speaker, you were absolutely right earlier to point out the exuberance on these benches earlier on during the speech by the right honourable member for Ross-Skye and Lochaber. And I'm sure you'll understand the passion and the frustration that we feel sometimes when we hear the honourable members and right honourable members opposite talking about the voice of Scotland and Scottish voices. Mr. Speaker, I am proud to be part of a 1,200% increase in Scottish seats represented on this side of the House in the government benches. Let there be no doubt I shall be voting tonight to support the Prime Minister and her government, and I welcome the opportunity to do so. It's clear that a third general election in the space of less than 4 years would not be in the national interest, especially at such a crucial time for the future of our country. And the truth is that an election would not solve anything. It would not give us certainty, it would not change the EU and their negotiating positions, and it would not change the choices before us. It would only be a recipe for delay and division. People across the country can see what is going on here. Politicians on the benches opposite seeking to exploit the issues of historic importance currently facing this country for party political advantage. The people in this country will have none of it. I will have none of it, and this House should have none of it. When I vote tonight, I will be voting as a unionist to support a government that has been resolutely committed to protecting our precious union. This Prime Minister and this government has stood up for the interests of the majority of Scots who voted to keep the United Kingdom together in 2014 and who still do not want another independence referendum. A majority of Scots, by the way, a similar percentage, about 56%, voted for parties committed to Brexit in the 2017 general election. Over the last 19 months, this government has consistently stood up to the grandstanding and grievance-mongering of the SNP and who does not speak for the whole of Scotland, as they would have us believe. And in Northern Ireland, the Prime Minister has, throughout this process, worked tirelessly to ensure that Northern Ireland remains a stable part of the United Kingdom. And I was glad to hear the Right Honourable Member for Belfast North express his support for the government in this motion. The contrast between the heartfelt and committed unionism of this government and the hopeless pandering of the Labour Party could not be clearer. We all know about the Leader of the Opposition's thoughts on Northern Ireland, but more and more Scottish unionists are now coming to recognise that they can no longer trust Labour to stand up for Scotland's place in the United Kingdom. As recently as September, the Leader of the Opposition equivocated on the possibility of doing a deal with the SNP and allowing Nicola Sturgeon to impose Indirect 2 on the Scottish people. I remind my English, Welsh and Northern Irish colleagues that this is not a specifically Scottish issue. It is all of our United Kingdom that the SNP wish to break apart. Time and time again, here and in Holyrood, Scottish Labour have sided with the SNP's attempts to use Brexit to undermine the Union. Only this government, a Conservative government led by this Prime Minister, has a track record to be trusted on protecting our Union. And that, foremost in my mind, among 8.5 years of Conservative achievements in government, is why I shall be supporting the government tonight.
Conclude.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Sorry, just before I do pick the Right Honourable Lady's pardon, I should have announced that the Right Honourable Lady is the last speaker to be subject to the 4-minute limit, and then a 3-minute limit has to be introduced, as I'm seeking to accommodate as many colleagues as I can. And so the Honourable Gentleman from Dudley will be subject to the 3-minute limit. And Clwyd.
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to read a letter from a constituent which I had this morning by email, a real person. Dear Anne Clwyd, I am your constituent, and I'm deeply concerned at what Brexit uncertainty is already doing to our country. No form of Brexit commands a majority among politicians. There is only one sensible road left to pursue, and that is to take the decision back to the voters and let us decide. Parliament is deadlocked. The government's version of Brexit has failed and been rejected by Parliament. 2 years of uncertainty, divisive argument, and no clear solutions to the country's biggest problems has got us nowhere. Best for Britain's new research, carried out in partnership with Hope Not Hate, proves 60% of people now want the final say on Brexit. Every region now supports letting the people decide. I have included the regional results below. I would appreciate it if you would reply to this message to tell me Do you support giving the people the final say on the Brexit deal, with the option to stay in the EU? Please understand the strength of my feeling on this issue. There is no majority in Parliament for any form of Brexit. While Parliament is in deadlock, the country is uniting around a referendum to resolve it. Please give us the final say. And he lists the support for a public vote on Brexit by region and country. East of England, 56%. East Midlands, 56.8%. London, 67.6%. North East, 59.8%. North West, 61.2%. South East, 57.8%. South West, 55.1%. West Midlands, 57.9%. Yorkshire and Humber, 58.9%. Scotland, 67.7%. Wales, 60.30%. Yours sincerely, David Matthews, Kilfynydd, Wales. My answer to him is, I support a referendum and I want to stay in the European Union.
Mike Wood. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This House can have confidence in this government because it's taken this country from the brink of bankruptcy to being a successful and growing economy that's creating prosperity and better opportunities for people in every part of this country. It recognises the hopes, the aspirations of hard-working people, people who work hard and want their children to have better chances than they had. This government's giving children the best possible start in life, doubling free childcare for 3- and 4-year-olds. And next year will be more record spending on early years education. The reforms that were originally made by the current Environment Secretary in the face of hostile opposition are now delivering improved standards in our schools. From a record low of 19th in international comparators for reading under the last Labour government, risen to 8th under this one. I know the opposition don't like the figures for children in good and outstanding schools, but the fact remains that under the last Labour government in 2010, 66% of children taught in good or outstanding schools, now risen to 87%. Yes, that's 87% of a bigger number, of course it is. It's even better. And that's despite the well-recorded increase in difficulty in those inspections. For people...
Yes, I've extra minute. Of course. Thank you so much. I do appreciate it. I know we are short of time. But would you agree that there are more children in good and outstanding schools because there are more children? And do his figures include the poorest children?
I hesitate to explain basic mathematics, but 87%. An increase from 66% to 87% of a bigger number is even more of an increase. So, and when people are looking for work, they're now more likely to have a job, with 1,000 new jobs on average for every day since this government came to power in 2010, 4/5 of them full-time. And those jobs are more likely to be paid more thanks to the introduction of the national living wage, increases in the national minimum wage, and at the end of all that, people are allowed to keep more of the money that they work so very hard to earn. Whilst Labour doubles the starting tax rate for the lowest paid workers, it's this government that has taken 5 million low-paid workers out of paying income tax altogether. And for people looking for their first home, house building had absolutely collapsed ahead of 2010 as a result of the recession. But now house building is higher than in 29 out of the last 30 years. This government recognises the aspiration that people have to own their own home. But it also recognises the need for good social and private rented housing as well. So whilst it's the opposition who are dogmatically opposed to letting people buy the houses they live in. This government is supporting first-time buyers, but also lifting the cap on the HRA borrowing to allow for more council-built social housing. And at every stage in life, spending on the NHS will be £20 billion higher at the end of this 5-year period than at the start. That's on top of the 15,000 extra doctors, nearly 13,000 more nurses in our hospitals compared to 2010. Hard-working families deserve better than the paleo-Marxist Citizen Smith Tribute Act that's offered by the opposition frontbench. For economic security, greater opportunity, sustainable investment in our public services. These and many other reasons.
Point of order, George Howarth.
If you could help me, is the term pillar considered unparliamentary?
I don't think that word was used. I think the word was paleo. I think the word was paleo, if I understood correctly. That is rather unfair that the point of order came when it did, and the honourable gentleman should certainly have 10 seconds to finish his speech.
Economic security, greater opportunity and sustainable investment in our public services. These and many other reasons are why Dudley South and this House can have confidence in Her Majesty's government this evening.
Jonathan Reynolds, paleo.
To say I have no confidence in Her Majesty's government, and in doing so, I'm not going to address the domestic record of this government. I wish I had time, because this has been a government of hunger and homelessness, and that's a record that needs revealing. But clearly in 3 minutes that isn't possible. But what I do want to say is this. The reason the government genuinely deserved to lose this vote today is because there's only one reason for this government's existence. There's only one reason why the Prime Minister is the Prime Minister, and that's Brexit. The job of this government was to deliver Brexit. After the referendum, the majority of MPs accepted the result and wanted to work pragmatically on a deal to secure the best terms of our new relationship. We didn't do so lightly. Don't forget the referendum was only called to try and unsolve some internal problems in the Conservative Party. David Cameron expected another hung parliament. He thought the Liberals would be in coalition with him again and he could drop the idea entirely, and he got it wrong. And as a result, we all got the most divisive politics this country has had in the modern era. We all got the denigration of expertise, of reason, becoming the new normal. All of us saw our friend murdered in that campaign. And yet, despite that, there was no doubt that this House had, and still does have, a cross-party majority for a Brexit deal. But how did the Prime Minister respond to that? Did she reach out across party lines? No. Did she seek to unite Leavers and Remainers? No. Did she provide leadership on the big questions? Absolutely not. Instead, we had it played from the beginning for narrow party advantage. Reasonable concerns about how customs would work, how the banking system would function, the rights of EU citizens, even what queue and passport control EU citizens would use, were first dismissed and then quite cynically and falsely were presented as opposition to Brexit itself. And when an election was called, despite the Prime Minister giving her word, Downing Street briefed it as a chance to crush the saboteurs. Well, how ironic that the biggest saboteur of all to the deal has turned out to be the Prime Minister herself. And it is her deal which has been crushed. But on that point on leadership of the big issues, now we all appreciate the Conservative Party is irrevocably split on this issue, and a decision on the final destination risks losing one half entirely. We appreciate that. But the answer to that is to reach out. It is to go for a conversation with all of the House of Commons. Instead of that, we got the member for Uxbridge appointed Foreign Secretary, travelling around Europe insulting our friends. We got the nationalistic rhetoric of the Citizens of Nowhere speech. We got the idea at Conservative Conference, let's list foreign workers as if we're living in 1930s Germany. We had the Chancellor threatening our friends and allies with economic warfare like the UK was some overgrown school bully, all of which has squandered centuries and centuries of goodwill and landed us where we were. It is this Prime Minister, this government, these red lines, this strategy that are to blame for bringing this country to the abyss. They have nothing left to offer, and in the national interest they should go.
Antoinette Sandbach.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, it was a pleasure to follow the member for Staley-Bridge and Hyde, although I couldn't disagree more with him, with his characterisation of him. I remember a Labour Prime Minister that promised this country a referendum on the Lisbon Treaty, and virtually his last act in government was to sign it and renege on that promise to the British people. And I feel that the resentment after years of broken Labour promises in relation to referendums has been a large bears a large part of the blame in the outcome of the referendum vote, not to mention the absolutely miserable way in which the Leader of the Opposition failed to campaign or make a proper case for remaining in the EU during the referendum debate. So I will take no lectures from the party opposite. And when he talks about reaching out, there is no explanation as to why, how the Labour policy will get over the line in terms of state aid. Because they say that they want a customs union, but they don't want to accept rules on state aid. They say they want a customs union and can negotiate a better deal, but don't want to accept the rules on free movement. And the reality of the Labour Party position is that it would fail its own 6 tests. Now, I am someone who, in this House, has shown a willingness to work across party to get a decent and sensible Brexit result, despite the fact that I personally believe that the best deal that we have is remaining in the EU. I made a promise to try and implement the referendum result, but I do not see that there have been any constructive proposals from the front bench on the other side. And the reason why I have confidence in this government, and I do, is because although the press is taken over by Brexit, we have been getting on with the job in this country. We have been delivering in so many other ways. 39,000 people, workers in my constituency, have been taken out of tax because of this government's proposals. And I remember Gordon Brown introducing a 10p tax rate on those earning just over £4,500. £4,500, and they had the lowest paid had to pay tax.
Exactly.
Now, a low-paid worker in my constituency will not pay tax until they are earning at least £12,500. That is one of many achievements that this government has made. Look at the new benefit that we have introduced in terms of paid parental leave. It is one of the first new benefits that we've introduced for many years. 2 weeks paid parental leave for parents. That is a significant achievement. We are seeing very good environmental policies coming out of DEFRA. There is a good record to be proud of.
Thank you. Emma Hardy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a pleasure to follow the member for Edinburgh. The unsettled mood that we feel here in the chamber today, and in fact the unsettled mood that we feel across the whole of Parliament, is reflected across the whole of our society. There is a feeling when you go out there into the communities and a desire for change, a desire for something else. Now, this feeling and desire for change manifests itself in different ways, but we would be wrong to ignore it and to underestimate the significance of it. It manifests itself in the anger that is felt in our communities, including the increased hate that all of us across the House are receiving. And it manifests itself in the despair and the disassociation of democracy and the lack of faith in anybody probably standing here in Parliament today. So this moment is a pivotal moment, and it is more than I will say about whether you think we should have a Labour government or Conservative government, though of course the answer is Labour. It's more about how do we give back our trust and faith to ordinary people, because this feeling and this mood for change is not going to go away, because people are exhausted. They're exhausted by austerity. I don't think anybody in this House appreciates quite how draining poverty is, how the daily grind can get you down. And if nothing else, I would like every member here to reflect just on this statistic, even if you ignore every other word I say, that across Yorkshire there has been a 30% increase in the number of suicides. My constituency covers the Humber Bridge, and I've mentioned this before, that the Humber Bridge has become a hotspot for suicides, people driving from around the country to come there and take their own lives. What greater damning indictment of this government can there be that they have left people in such a state of despair, a feeling that they have no future whatsoever? And what answers are they being offered? But nothing. More arguments opposite, more people tearing into each other opposite, where the people in our community continue to suffer. They suffer when they go to the NHS. And the nonsense about all these better, good and outstanding schools. And with respect, I suggest that the Minister goes and actually checks, the member goes and actually checks when the last time these schools were inspected. And that might give him a more accurate figure if he's going to start spouting that out at us. Crime is increasing and people are feeling unsafe in their homes. The antisocial behaviour that so many people here probably ignore because the gates to their properties allow them to cannot be ignored by the people in our communities. They're feeling unsafe in their homes. We have a moment now to really make a difference. It is in our gift to give people that change that they need. We can channel that change for need into a vision that is positive and a vision for hope, but only if we vote down this government and bring a Labour government that will truly deliver for everybody in our country.
Even though I do respect the comments made by the Honourable Lady from Kingston upon Hull and Hessel, I'm concerned that she sees everything in a very different light to I. I'm much more optimistic about our future. But I think the motion before us today may seem very simplistic, and yet it raises points that go much, much further. We really are in the midst of a battle for the heart and soul of our country, and all those things we hold very dear. The decisions we take in this place today and over the coming weeks will really irreversibly change the course of our history. They will shape Britain's standing in the world for a generation, and in the process will perhaps determine the very future of this Parliament, the mother of all parliaments, which has served our nation through war and peace for the best part of thousands of years. On the central question of Europe, which has led us to this position today, I make the following points. Like the long-time Brexiteers, I am fully committed to ensuring that the UK can end its membership of the European Union on the 29th of March at 11 p.m. as set down in law. Nothing less than an agreement which ends the free movement of people, in addition to returning full control over our money and our laws, is acceptable either to myself or to the majority of the people of Erewash who voted to leave the referendum in June 2016. My message for the Remainers is I voted to remain in the European Union, but we lost that argument and consequently the UK will be leaving the EU. Europe may have brought us to this point, but that does not detract from the fact that the single biggest threat to the safety, security and prosperity of our country is sat on the benches opposite. The choice before us today is very clear. A socialist government who, within hours of being returned to office, would cause a run on the pound, and those aren't my words, they're the words of the Shadow Chancellor. That's true. A socialist government that would drive investment out of Britain through its ideological pursuit of nationalisation. And a socialist government whose own backbenchers advocate the confiscation of council houses bought under the right to buy scheme. A socialist government that would make my constituents poorer in every sense of the word. And I can't let that happen to my constituents of Erewash. I cannot countenance such outcomes, and the government has my full support and full confidence today and in the future.
Thank you. Geraint Davis.
Mr. Speaker, Margaret Thatcher famously quoted Attlee in saying that referenda were the instruments of demagogues and dictators because Hitler used them to adopt supreme power and to basically invade other countries after rearming. So my view for no confidence of the Prime Minister isn't simply because she's doubled the debt, created poverty and social injustice, but basically that she thinks the advisory referendum is an unconditional mandate to Brexit under any costs and any circumstances without consulting with the people on whether this represents their reasonable expectations. The people were offered more money, more trade, control over their laws, control over migration. But in fact, they haven't got any of those things. We'll have to pay £39 billion. There'll be a squeezing of the economy. There'll be less jobs. There'll be less trade. We won't be with Team EU in terms of negotiating with big players like China. Northern Ireland will be an open border for immigration via Dublin. We won't control our immigration. And in any case, if we did, we just switch a cultural neighbour to more distant immigration in any case. There's no evidence that the people of Britain support the deal. It's a betrayal of conservatism because we move away from the most established market in the world and break up the union, a betrayal of socialism because we basically have a smaller cake to divide more equally. It's bad for our economy, our security, our environment and our common values. So it's my view that I have no confidence in the Prime Minister because she has no confidence in the people to make a judgment on the deal she's delivered. If they want it, let's go ahead. But otherwise, unless we don't have that vote, we'll just wait another 2 years in the transition period when we could, in fact, have a vote on this, decide on reflection. It's better for all of us to remain, and we can have 2 years sorting out this country rather than having this situation where we're just talking about Brexit and Britain is burning around us. Yes, there will be some anger if we have a people's vote, but I put this to you, that there will be absolute rage if we don't and Brexit goes forward. People voted to leave. They didn't vote to leave their jobs. And Brexit, which is now being seen warts and all, and we're also seeing the fact that Europe is a much more virtuous place than before. There was a massive defeat last night. Yes, the Prime Minister needs to look cross-party at all the options. If we can't agree any deal, let's put the deal we've got to the people and they can decide whether to continue. In the meantime, I'm calling for a general election, but if we don't get a general election, we should have a people's vote. The Labour Party should stand up for Remain, and when we win that, there should be an election, because we'll have a government which was elected on strong, stable Brexit, will be weak, unstable, and Remain, and then we will deliver a Labour government and a better Britain in the future.
Berghardt.
Obviously, I'm not terribly delighted that we're having a vote of confidence in the Conservative government, but I suppose I might thank the opposition for bringing my party back together today. Because whilst we were heavily divided last night, I can be confident that we are all going to go through the same lobby together, and it will be a bonding experience. So thank you very much for doing that for us. It's quite right, of course, that we are having a vote of no confidence. We find ourselves in a peculiar hung parliament in which, as the Leader of the Opposition said, the government suffered a major defeat last night, suffered a defeat on a money bill. It's quite right that the confidence of the House is tested. But we are all quite aware of what is going to happen. The government is going to win this vote this evening, and then we are going to have to move on. And the most interesting question is not about this vote, which is a foregone conclusion. It's about what is going to happen after that. We know what the Prime Minister is going to do. She has offered to reach out and speak to other corners of the Commons and look for some consensus. But what we still don't know is what the opposition is asking for. And the fact that we have been put on the spot for a vote of no confidence when the opposition hasn't said what it would take to the public in the event of a general election is quite frankly shameful. I mean, it reminds me very much of how in 1997 the Labour Party managed to breeze into power without telling the public. Well, yes, they won by a convincing majority, but they didn't tell the public in advance what their policy was on the single European currency. It had to be wrung out of them when they were already in power. So the Labour Party has track record on this. If the Labour Party wants to go to the country, as it does, then it at least should have the courtesy to tell the public what it is going to take into that vote. But let's imagine that it did go through tonight. Let's imagine record debt is what we would have. £1,000 billion of extra debt, £35,000 extra for everyone who lives in this country. That is what the Honourable Lady's Party is offering this country. That is what the Honourable Lady's Party is offering my voters out there and my tax-paying constituents. Very happy to give way and take the time.
The honourable gentleman, perhaps because he is rather younger than me, seems to have forgotten that when the Labour Party took office, waiting lists in the NHS were 18 months for some specialities.
Died of cancer.
Under the Labour government, there were practically no waiting lists in some specialities, and that is a record we are all proud of.
And when the Honourable Lady's Party left power, we had record debt, a crashed economy, a loss of confidence in our foreign policy after a disastrous Iraq war. That party ran this country into the ground, and 8 years later we have record employment, we have rising wages, we have everything that a sensible, evenly minded, well-balanced economy has brought.
Order. A very unseemly atmosphere, but the honourable gentleman is at least still smiling, and that is to be welcomed. Order. Let's hear the honourable.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The truth is that the Labour Party left power under an enormous cloud. Everybody knows it. They left after a disastrous 13 years in office, which had seen the economy destroyed, and we on this side of the House are united in our desire to make sure that they don't have an opportunity to do it again. Because, let's be frank, the Blair-Brown years were, compared to what would come in a general election this year, should this party, the party opposite, force upon us, was a golden age. I mean, we would rather have Blair and Brown than Corbyn and McDonnell any day of the week. But those options are not available to the British public.
Speaker, can I first thank the Leader of the Opposition in his absence for tabling this vote of no confidence, which I will be supporting in the lobbies this evening. Mr. Speaker, I came into politics challenged with trying to make a difference to the lives of ordinary people of Bradford West, to try to be part of a system that is about putting people first and not about people clinging to power and positions and self-preservation being at the heart of everything they do. I have lived experience of what destitution and poverty is. So when a generation later I have constituents that come into my surgery in sheer destitution and literally crying due to not knowing how they're going to feed their children and meet their very basic needs, when the reality of insecure jobs and in-work poverty and whilst having dependence leads to further destitution, then the question has to be whether this government is fit for purpose. From my short time in this House, Mr. Speaker, I feel the real tragedy for me is that whilst the nail in the coffin for this debate has been yesterday's catastrophic defeat of any government in the history of our democracy, for me and my constituents, Mr. Speaker, the truth is that this government hasn't been fit for purpose for a very long time. This government wasn't fit for purpose when the UN Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty described levels of child poverty in the UK as not just a disgrace, but a social calamity and an economic disaster in the fifth largest economy in the world. This government wasn't fit for purpose when it pursued the policy of rolling out a hostile environment leading to tragedies with the Windrush scandal. This government wasn't fit for purpose when it was found in contempt of this Parliament. This government isn't fit for purpose when it is repeatedly defeated in the courts by single parents and people with disabilities and is forced to go back to the drawing board on its own policies. This government wasn't fit for purpose when it failed again last year to stop the increase in homelessness on the streets of Britain and even failed to save the life of the poor man that died outside the doors of the Parliament just weeks ago. This government wasn't fit for purpose when those on the benches opposite decided to use food banks for photo ops. This government isn't fit for purpose when programmes like I, Daniel Blake, is many people's reality and no longer a fiction. This government has consistently acted in the interests of the few and not the many, offering tax giveaways to the rich whilst viciously cutting services for the most vulnerable in this country. The government wasn't fit for purpose when the Prime Minister knew her deal was dead before recess and yet chose to sabotage and hold Parliament hostage by delaying the vote, and the list goes on. Those 117 of the colleagues across the benches, when they voted that this Prime Minister was not fit to govern them and their party, how can they go back to the electorate and say that this government is that Prime Minister is fit to leave the country and not them?
Bill Grant.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to follow the honourable member for Bradford West. When members consider their position on the matter of confidence tonight, I would argue that this government's record must be assessed, not just on the basis of one vote, however fundamental that issue is for the nation's future, but on this government's record in office. Three practical measures of a government's relative success are taxation levels for working families, employment levels and investment in public services. It must be remembered that it is this government which has cut the taxes for 32 million working people in order that they can keep more of the money that they earn. It is this government which has seen unemployment not simply reduce but plummet to a record low And it's this government which is investing an extra £20+ billion in the NHS for our future health. And through Barnett Consequential, that will benefit NHS Scotland immensely. In the same period, all that the opposition front bench has achieved is an ever-changing conviction on each issue with little consensus of opinion. In fact, the only consensus seems to be that the government has apparently got it wrong on every issue. This is clearly not the case, and the facts do not support the opposition's somewhat gloomy assessment. This government is pressing ahead with ongoing investment in research and development, with growth deals throughout the country, such as the one emerging in Ayrshire. It recognises the importance of the environment with the 25-year environmental plan, never been done before in the United Kingdom. It has secured a stable economy from a very weak and unstable inheritance, and it listens when things need to change, particularly in relation to universal credit. That is not a government in crisis, as members opposite allege. They are simply doing this to secure an election, but this is a government which is getting on with the business of governing. The Prime Minister has worked incredibly hard on these and other issues over the last 2 years, and I would earnestly encourage honourable members to support the government tonight. With everything else that is going on, with this party being the only party with a clear desire to honour the referendum, this is not the time to be holding an unnecessary and unwanted general election. It is time to get on with what we have been asked to do before our constituents lose faith in every parliamentarian in this House. In closing, Mr Speaker, I have every confidence in Her Majesty's Conservative and Unionist government, and I will be voting for it tonight.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, last night's defeat was an extraordinary humiliation for the Prime Minister. And if ever there was a situation to be described as chickens coming home to roost, it was this. For this is a national calamity of the Prime Minister's own making. It was this Prime Minister who failed to reach out across the House to find consensus on a way forward from the narrow win for Leave in the 2016 referendum. It was the Prime Minister who painted herself into a corner with a series of bright red lines designed only to appease the most extreme Brexiteers in her party. And it was the Prime Minister who triggered Article 50 far too prematurely. But crucially, though, it was the Prime Minister who has also resolutely failed to tackle any of the underlying injustices that drove the 2016 referendum result. Many people voted Leave because they believe that the status quo in this country is intolerable. And they are right. It is. We are a country of grotesque inequalities, not just between classes, but geographically between regions, especially between North and South, and between thriving cities and failing towns within the same region. Last year, the Commission on Social Mobility identified the 30 worst places for social mobility, and every single one of them voted to leave. Now, I don't think that that was a coincidence. So the Prime Minister's mantra about bringing the country back together rings very hollow when you look at the evidence. Welfare cuts since 2010 have cost lone parent households an average of over £5,000, increasing child poverty rates in those households from 37% to 62%. The NHS has endured the longest period of austerity in its history. The evidence goes on. So today has to be the day when we start to change the conversation about Brexit and about the future of Britain. Not by slavishly repeating that Brexit is the will of the people, but by really and genuinely hearing the voices of those who have been economically and politically excluded for decades. The millions of people who rightly chose to give the establishment an almighty kicking in June 2016 deserve their concerns to be addressed and properly resolved. Now, Mr Speaker, I believe that a people's vote, if it learns the lessons from the failed Remain campaign of 2016, can be the vehicle that we need to have that honest debate in this country. It will be the chance to be able to move on from the divisive and dangerous place that we're in by committing to Project Hope rather than Project Fear. And Mr Speaker, whoever is in number 10 must be someone who is going to be able to put that issue back to the people. Because a general election that is fought by two of the biggest parties who both have a commitment to Brexit does not take us forward on this issue. So while of course I want to get rid of that toxic government opposite, I also want to make sure that we resolve this most pressing issue and get this question back to the people, because Parliament has shown itself incapable of resolving. It needs to go back to the people.
Thank you. Julian Knight.
Mr Speaker, as ever, it is a huge pleasure to follow the Honourable Lady from Brighton Pavilion. Polls. We've heard a lot about polls today. I'll give you a couple. First of all, 52-48. We all know those numbers. And I believe it is intrinsic, it is absolutely beholden on this House to respect that referendum result. The other poll is 34%. That is the current Labour Party polling. Quite incredibly, at this particular time, 34%. And the reasons for that were encapsulated, I think, Mr. Speaker, by the Honourable Member for Barrow and Furness, who said quite simply that the Shadow Chancellor and the Leader of the Opposition are unfit for high office. And I think as people get closer to the potential of a buying decision, they would see that very starkly indeed. And the other reason for the 34% is these 6 tests, the magic unicorn tests, designed to fail. And the public aren't foolish. They aren't going to be hoodwinked by this. They know intrinsically that this is sophistry of the very most politically contemptible sort. And I am going to say now to members opposite, at some point later today, tomorrow, the grown-ups are going to have a conversation about what the party opposite actually want out of this.
Will my honourable friend give way?
I will give way.
Does my honourable friend agree with me that what people tell me and my constituency in Basingstoke and businesses in Basingstoke is they want certainty?
Absolutely.
How can they get certainty when they have challenges in the government and also rejecting the government's plans yesterday?
Absolutely. And certainty is all. And as JLR, who I'll be speaking about in the adjournment debate, they want certainty as well. And I really do think it's a little bit rich when people talk about the rights of EU citizens and UK citizens, and then they reject a deal that protect those rights. Now, I would say that a second referendum is itself a stain on this Parliament. The division would be enormous, and as I say, we've been entrusted. I also would say that no deal makes no sense to me in the dislocation that this could cause to our economy. I know that people talk about stockpiling and emergency provision, etc. But the reality is, what happens when those stocks actually run out? And what happens as well if we do end up with dislocation? What happens if we then have to go to the EU to negotiate certain terms at that particular point? We would be in a very weak position. So I would say both those things are out. So we have to come together sensibly. Despite this stunt today, this way in which, frankly, we're going to see honourable members filling out their Facebook pages with how many different times they can say particular words in order basically to link in with their local momentum groups. It is time for sensible people, growing-up people, to actually face the consequences, the circumstances we face in. That is what the public want. They do not like this spectacle at all. Now, when it comes to the achievements of this particular government, I would say in 2010, we inherited 11% of GDP. Now, let me just be very clear to you, clear to the House, that 11% of GDP is such an enormous sum that you cannot go borrowing that sum for very long. Eventually, the markets call in your loans, and you end up having to pay such a high interest rate that you end up in a depression. So we had to sort that out as a government. But we did that while protecting the NHS. And we have announced an increase in NHS spending, which is twice the level proposed, increase-wise, than Labour proposed at the 2017 general election. Now, not everything, is perfect in that respect. There are issues, and I really have to say that we are working towards trying to solve those ongoing issues. But when it comes to the big matter of the economy, when it comes to jobs, when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to 1 million kids in better, outstanding schools, this government is delivering. We have to get through Brexit, and we will deliver more.
Andy Slaughter.
Mr. Speaker, the provocation for this debate is the unprecedented defeat of the central plank of the government's policy that should have led seamlessly to a general election. And in the Brexit debate earlier this week, I spoke about the threat that Brexit represents to the prosperity and the opportunity and the security of my constituents and to many of my businesses. But I also represent some of the poorest communities in the UK. Although I'm proud of the work it does, I'm not proud to have the busiest food bank in London. Last week I spent an afternoon at one of St Mungo's homeless hostels in West Kensington, talking to residents and staff. They told me that the annual street homelessness count that will be published on the 31st of January will show it has doubled in the last year. They gave me 3 reasons for that: universal credit, the increase in no recourse to public funds and tenancy takeover, where drug dealers seize the premises of vulnerable tenants. So the war on the poor, the hostile environment and a descent into lawlessness, three of the worst consequences of austerity. The cuts in police numbers, especially neighbourhood officers, is putting whole communities at risk. I spent part of New Year's Eve at a crime scene in Fulham, an attempted murder which led to the arrest of 40 people and the recovery of a number of dangerous weapons. I estimate that half of the people I now see in surgery have problems which would have made them eligible for legal aid before the passage of the LASPO Act. Yesterday, my CCG, looking to make £44 million of cuts to its budget, began to consult on reducing opening hours for urgent care centres and GPs. Not just bad in itself, but in direct contradiction to the NHS strategy that calls for an extension of those services to justify the closures of A&Es and emergency beds. For the first time in a generation, we're seeing year-on-year real terms cuts in schools' budgets. Inner city schools don't just educate, they give emotional and practical support to families that struggle with poverty and poor living standards. And perhaps the worst betrayal by this government is to cut funding for social housing by 80%, 100% under the former London Mayor, when 800,000 people are on waiting lists. Mr. Speaker, my local council and the Mayor of London do their best and effectively do what they can to alleviate the conditions I've described. But for real change, we need a Labour government. This Prime Minister's legacy will be to have ruined this country in half the time it took the Thatcher and Major governments. Enough is now enough. We need a general election and we need a Labour government.
Chris Green.
Speaker, this debate should be one of two halves. Firstly, it's right the opposition challenged the government on the government's record, but the second part ought to be the fact that the opposition seek to become the government itself. They should be presenting a vision for the country, and they have demonstrably failed to demonstrate that they have a vision for the country that they can deliver in a few weeks' time if they won an election. That part has been wholly absent from this debate so far. Now, on the referendum day 3 years ago, in 2016, during that referendum, I spent a great deal of time talking to constituents and visiting polling stations around my constituency in parts of Wigan and in parts of Bolton. And it was startling. On that day, the polling stations in the poorest neighbourhoods, the poorest communities, those polling stations had a turnout that they had never seen before, far higher than for local elections, far higher than for a general election. This vote on the referendum on the European Union reached out in a way that politicians here have never done before, or at least not for decades. This is one of the key reasons why it's so important to respect this referendum decision. These people who perhaps have never voted before, perhaps they've had the opportunity of decades to vote, and they have chosen to say that there is no election that's important enough that we actually want to engage. Now, this referendum was a vote where they decided to engage in politics, engage in the life of the country. And it's vital that this government now respects that decision. We are leaving the European Union on the 29th of March this year. If this decision is delayed by suspending Article 50 or even cancelling Article 50, that will be a sign to the electorate, all voters, whether leave or remain, that their decision is being disrespected. And worse still, if there's a second referendum to dismiss the first referendum, it will be a sign from this place, your vote was wrong. Get it right the second time. That is repugnant. That will be so damaging to our democracy. I urge the government, focus on delivering Brexit, focus on delivering on the 29th of March, use the opportunity, use the days we have left to get the best deal from the European Union, but on the 29th, we must leave.
Sir Edward Davey.
I'll be voting for this motion tonight, not just because of the failure of the government on Brexit, because of their failure on so many issues, rising crime, the railways, the social care disaster, the schools budget and so on. I think the speech earlier in this debate from the honourable member from Warrington North actually encapsulated the best. But on Brexit, which is obviously on everyone's minds, one has to ask, why is this government unable to deliver on Brexit? And it's fundamentally because the Conservative Party is split. It is absolutely divided. We saw that in the lobbies last night, but we've actually seen it, Mr. Speaker, in the record number of resignations from this Prime Minister's government. In just 3 years, we've seen 32 people resign from her government. Another dreadful record. This shows that this government is incapable. Is incapable of. I'll take them. Well, no, the honourable has a number of shadow front benchers that have resigned since the current leader came to power. Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was going to actually talk about a speech by the member for Brentford and Ongar, who said this motion tonight might unite the Conservatives. It probably will, because a rafter of turkeys ain't going to vote for Christmas. But the ultimate division is still there, and that should worry people across our country, because this government and this party is incapable of delivering Brexit. It has shown that over the last 2.5 years. And that's why the Right Honourable Lady, the member for Putney, was right. The government now have to reach across the aisles. They have to talk to all parties, have to get Parliament to deliver this policy area. But if they're going to do that and do it successfully, they've got to do 3 things. Article 50 has to be extended. No deal has to be taken off the table. And the government has to show that when there is a deal agreed, that will be put to the British people with the option of remaining in the EU. That, I think, can get consensus. That could be delivered. That could bring the House together. At the moment, we're just hearing the Conservative Party blaming everyone else but themselves. They blame the Remainers. They blame the opposition. They blame the Governor of the Bank of England. Sometimes I think they're going to blame sunshine, moonlight, good times and boogie, Mr. Speaker. There's only one group to blame. It's the Conservative Party.
Thank you. Alex Chalk.
Mr. Speaker. A lot of people ask me, and I dare say every honourable member in this House, why on earth would you go into politics? And they ask it particularly at a time like this. But I know the answer, and I know the answer as a Conservative. It's because I believe to my bones in social mobility. Now, I want to make crystal clear, I expect there are people across this House who believe in that. But the issue that divides us is how you come up with solutions, how you go about achieving it, how you unlock potential and seek out the treasure that's in the heart of every man and woman. And I know it's as a Conservative Member of Parliament that it's been possible to provide opportunities in my community in Cheltenham that has allowed people to fulfil that potential. Because my community, although people don't realise it, they say, Cheltenham, for goodness sake, it must be the most affluent place in the country. Not a bit of it. We have some of the most deprived communities anywhere in our country, where people live in generational entrenched poverty. And what has this Conservative Party done for my community? £22 million for a cyber park in Cheltenham, which will allow the finest minds to come in and out of GCHQ to create startups which mean that if there is a person living nearby who has come from generational poverty, but they've got something about them, something which says, I want to better myself, I want to go forward, I want to provide for my family, and I want to build a future. That opportunity exists. Money that has come in the form of over 400 million for a road project. Now, you might say, oh, a road project, who cares about that? Road projects are what allow a local community to thrive. It's what allows opportunities to be generated and futures to be created. But it's not just about infrastructure projects. Recognising the issue of homelessness, it's this government that provided £1.3 million for social impact bonds. What does that mean? That means one-on-one support for individuals who can go and address the needs of the most vulnerable in our society, be that drug addiction, be that mental health problems, be that debt. And that has served to make a huge difference in my community, so that it's not just a stronger community economically, but a fairer one too. What's more, £3 million to help deliver social housing in Cheltenham, in Portland Place. So, of course, there is always room for improvement. Of course, there is always more to do. But on that issue of social mobility, which is the party that isn't just talking the talk, but walking the walk. It is this government that is achieving it, this government which is making a difference in my community, and that is why I will vote against this motion tonight.
Gregory Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to commence by saying since I came into the House in 2001, I've seen a significant increase in the number of people in the chamber right across the divide who have come to speak and vote in favour and in defence of this United Kingdom, compared to what was the case some 17 years ago, and for that I and the people at home are eternally grateful for that, and I'm sure that is shared across the divide. I want to say, Mr. Speaker, that I will be voting against the motion tonight because I retain confidence in this government on the terms and conditions contained in the confidence and supply motion that we entered into some time ago. But I want to, at this stage, offer a piece of critical advice to my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister. And it is this. In the past year and a half, I believe that her negotiations have not best served this United Kingdom. And I believe last night's defeat, the scale of the defeat, can offer her and us an opportunity for a revised position by her. And I believe that that should be a condition that she goes back to the EU and makes it very, very clear, just as she hasn't done up to now, that whenever they say a deal is only doable if it contains the backstop that we have arranged and agreed with you, that she goes back to them and says, agree is doable, an agreement is doable, but not on the terms and conditions of that backstop, because that backstop creates a division, a cleavage, a divorce within our United Kingdom, and we are not prepared to enter into any agreement that is based on that backstop. And it's only when she gets to that stage that we get Mr. Juncker last night, as he said, after he realised the scale of the defeat, after the possibility of what may emerge beyond last night's defeat could emerge in subsequent weeks, when he made the statement, which I think has not been commented upon, it is that we, the EU, are determined to get a deal. He wasn't saying that 6 months ago. He wasn't saying that 6 weeks ago. But he is saying it now, and the reason he's saying it now is because the appearance of no deal on the horizon has now suddenly galvanised the EU nation states, and our Prime Minister has got to take advantage of that now and has got to say to the EU, we are prepared to get a deal, but we are prepared to get a good deal and a reasonable deal, not a one-way deal like the deal that fell last night, but a deal that delivers both for the UK and for the EU. It is on that basis that I will be voting against the motion tonight, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Rebecca Powell.
And I rise to speak because I believe that this government is the right government to carry on with its serious work that it has begun, not just on Brexit, but on so many other important issues affecting our daily lives. And because I believe that a chain of events that might lead to a general election will in no way be good for the country. And because I am genuinely fearful of what might happen if this great country, but especially our businesses, should get into the hands of the member for Islington North. Should he ever get his hands on the tiller, this country will not be in safe hands. An election will certainly not solve the impending business at hand, which is delivering on our relationship with the EU. So, I believe that this government is the best government to deliver for us, not just nationally, but also locally. That's what's really important to me as the MP for Taunton Deane. And in my constituency, since the Conservatives have been in power, we have delivered more than any other government. There are more people in work than ever before in Taunton Deane, more SMEs setting up. There is more funding coming our way thanks to a strong economy. That's why my calls for 79 million for the new theatres in the hospital were agreed to and accepted, and that's why we got an additional 11 million for more health services locally. Yeah. We've had more funding for infrastructure, 28 million. We are upgrading the A358, we are upgrading the Toneway, we are upgrading the motorway junction. We've got 7 million to enable a road through Staple Grove where more housing is being built. We are building more housing than ever before in Taunton Deane, Mr. Speaker, and that's because of this strong economy. There is a great deal going on, and more children in Taunton Deane are getting a better education than ever before, and we're building a new special school. All of these things are only possible with a strong economy and with an understanding of what business needs. We've cut the Labour's astonishing deficit by 4/5, which has restored the public finances. Finally, I want to touch on the environment, and it won't surprise people. This government has an unparalleled record on working for the environment, and we must continue with our great work, which is another good reason why we need to leave the EU. I am backing the Prime Minister. She will come up with a deal. We must do it with compromise. We must work as a team on these benches. We must listen to the other side, but we must pull off Brexit. And I'm confident that this government, with its track record on the economy and all of the other things it's delivered, including on the environment, is the right government to do, and to do it successfully and to do it fairly, so that we leave future generations able to carry on the good work we've set in place and to live in a fair and wonderful economy and take this great nation into the future.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The famous phrase is that a fish rots from the head down. It is a recognition that bad leadership infects all that it touches. And what greater example of that than this present government? The rot isn't confined to Downing Street, it is infecting the whole country. Not strong and stable, but stubborn and self-obsessed. And Brexit is by far the clearest, but no means the only example. Frankly, the Prime Minister has turned Brexit into some modern-day bizarre Schleswig-Holstein question. Something that Palmerston himself claimed was so complicated only 3 people understood it. One was dead, one who'd been driven mad by it, and one who'd forgotten it altogether. But the truth is that this isn't a complicated situation. It's her red lines that have killed her deal. It's her red lines that have driven this Parliament mad. And it's her red lines that are best forgotten. This infectious failure has covered all bases. This is a government that can't organise a tailback on the M20. A government presiding over a shortage of nurses while stockpiling fridges. A government alienating our EU citizen neighbours whilst deporting our Windrush families. A government obsessed with what stickers are on the Speaker's wife's car, whilst ignoring the pleas for help with issues like knife crime. The roll call goes on and on. Universal credit, homelessness, the cost of living, the refugees crying out for sanctuary, the human rights of the women of Northern Ireland. At every turn, this government cannot get a grip, and those burning injustices burn harder as a result. This country is divided. This Parliament is divided. The deadlock is deepening, not dissolving, and the Prime Minister can't even be bothered to pick up a phone. That's right. No party can continue to prevaricate whilst the far right goes stronger. It will not stop with Brexit, and Brexit does not deal with the crisis of confidence in our politics we all now face. We are not the only country facing difficult choices or challenges, but we are the only country that thinks because it's the mother of all democracies, there's nothing wrong with how we approach things. Change has got to come for all our stakes. But for that to happen, it has to start at the top, and we have to stop the rot.
You Merriman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to speak not just on behalf of Brenda from Bristol, but all of the Brendas in Bexhill and Battle, who are probably feeling right now that the last thing we all want is a general election. But what we do want is our Parliament and all of our MPs to work better together and fix the issues of our day. And I've enjoyed this afternoon because I've had the opportunity to listen to many feelings, hopes, aspirations. But it depresses me that we still are in a position where people would rather shout at each other in this chamber as opposed to reaching out to each other, working out where we can identify issues that are common to us all and try and fix them. And in my constituency, I'm very proud of things that this government have helped me deliver since I was elected in 2015. All of my secondary schools have now moved to good or outstanding. I had the Secretary of State for Health come and spend time seeing our health service joined up with our social care team on Friday of last. And that made me very proud to see all these amazing leaders really working as one, working together. And again, I think that's a very good example for Parliament. Now, of course, I'm not naive. I recognise the opposition have to oppose and the government have to govern. I'm also not so naive that there are not big challenges in my constituency. That's why I'll be having a task force on homelessness, because I've noticed the streets in Bexhill getting worse. I've also noticed more casework from my constituents because there are not this levels of services available that there once were. So, of course, many points made by opposition members are correct. But equally, we now have more people in employment than we ever have done before. So it can't all be as bad as is being said on that side of the bench, and perhaps it can't all be as good as is sometimes said on this side of the bench. If we all took that attitude into this place and worked out how we could fix things which really matter to people, we might also be able to fix the issues of Brexit. But I will touch, to my point, on a matter that I thought we'd have got fixed by now when I got elected in 2015, social care reform. It's within us in this House to fix things for the most vulnerable and often the most elderly people in our communities. We agree on so much. A wealth tax set on this side, opposite of the House. On our side, in our manifesto, we talked a lot more about the fact that people should pay more. We're almost there, yet our hatred sometimes of each other just stops us reaching out. And when it comes to reaching out, Mr. Speaker, there's one thing I would like my government to do to really show that they are listening. The charge of £65 for an EU citizen to maintain and have the same rights that they enjoyed before we in this country took the step in the referendum. That does not feel fair to me. And I speak to many on both sides of the chamber who also feel it's not fair. Surely, if the government is listening, we reach out not just to them, but also to every member in this House who agrees with that, be they Leavers or Remainers, and really offer that olive branch. If we start in that particular way, perhaps others will appreciate the government is listening, and perhaps then we will work better together in the manner that our constituents expect from us all.
Alison Thewlis.
Mr. Speaker, I have no confidence in this government, and I never have done. I've got no confidence because of the way that the DWP treat people. I have no confidence because of the constituent who was sanctioned because they were visiting their dying father. I've got no confidence because my constituents was sanctioned while waiting to start a job with the DWP. Yep. I've got no sanction because of the way that people are treated on PIP. I've got no confidence because of the way that the two-child policy and the rape clause has been pursued against vulnerable women in our society, and it must be scrapped. I have no confidence because of the closure of Glasgow's job centres. I have no confidence because of the implementation of the hostile environment, of refugees left waiting, and of constituents who have not been able to be with their families. I have no confidence because of the constituent who lost out on his wife's visa because he was under the threshold by £7, Mr. Speaker. I have no confidence in this government because of the good character test that's being applied to children who can't get citizenship because this government thinks they are not of good character enough. And, Mr. Speaker, while we are on good character, I've got no confidence in this government because the Home Office told my constituent he could not get citizenship because he had volunteered with the Red Cross, and that was a sign of bad character too. I have no confidence in this government because of their pursuance of Section 3225 of the immigration rules, where people lost out on getting leave to remain because they had made a legitimate change to their tax returns and the government thought that that was somehow wrong. I have no confidence in this government because of their abject failure to deal with Scottish limited partnerships and to reform Companies House. It's almost as if they like money laundering in this country, Mr. Speaker. I have no confidence in this government because of the refusal, despite all evidence, to allow Glasgow to pursue supervised drug consumption rooms. It is well expected that drug deaths in Scotland will top 1,000 this coming year, but the government refuses to do so for ideological reasons. I have absolutely no confidence in them for doing so. I have no confidence in this government because they fail to realise that young people deserve a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. The under-25s are not worth the same when they go out to work, and that this pretendy living wage fails to give people the dignity and work that they deserve. I have no confidence in this government
because of their failure to tackle the real present danger that Brexit will cause to all of our constituents. That they put their head in their sand, that they refuse to accept the single market and the customs union as the best way forward. And Mr Speaker, I do have confidence in the people in my constituency. I have confidence in the people of Glasgow and the people of Scotland who voted for independence with such hope in 2014. And I know that when Scotland gets its chance again, it will have no confidence in this government and lots of confidence in themselves.
James Cartledge.
Mr Speaker, and I am sure, Mr Speaker, at some point in your life it is possible that you have owned a copy of that famous political book, The Downing Street Years, by Margaret Thatcher. And if so, given your memory, you may well recall the opening sentence of that book. The very first words read, "Ayes 311, noes 310. The result of the no-confidence vote in 1979, which brought Margaret Thatcher to power." And I say to my colleagues tonight, how would you feel if in a few years from now, browsing in the bookstore was a copy of the Downing Street Years by the Leader of the Opposition, and the opening sentence was a narrow defeat in a vote of confidence which led to a new era in British politics? Because we all know that it wouldn't be like the new era that the previous one I referred to brought in. 1979, it ushered in an era when free enterprise became back in the heart of British politics. We went through the difficult period of adjustment of our economy that culminated in the end of socialism and the fall of the Berlin Wall, the greatest victory in the history of modern conservatism. Instead, we would bring in a different era. All of that would be turned back. A return to nationalisation, command and control, the idea that the state knows best. Confiscatory tax rates, not education, 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 but regulation, regulation, regulation. And I say this to you, Mr Speaker, I am proud to stand on this side tonight. I became a Conservative after seeing what it was like in Eastern Europe, my experience of the true face of that supposedly compassionate ideology, and those who turned a blind eye to it should be ashamed of it. I started with Callaghan, I'm going to finish with Callaghan, Mr Speaker. Not the former Labour Prime Minister, but Detective Inspector Harry Callaghan of the San Francisco Police Department. Because I say, if anyone thinks it's a good idea that Labour win the no-confidence vote tonight and then get into power, all I can say is, I hope you're feeling lucky.
Clive Lewis.
Some members opposite have been calling into question the motivations of the opposition for calling this no-confidence vote. Let's be clear, Mr Speaker, yesterday's vote wasn't just a defeat, it was a complete and utter rout. Now, some members in today's debate have been talking about historical parallels, but I think if that had been a battle, it would have to compare to the Battle of Cannae, where Hannibal annihilated the Roman army. A textbook defeat, just like last night, was a textbook example of arrogance and hubris in government. But, you know, last night's vote aside, let's run through some of the myriad of reasons why I and we on this side of the House have no confidence in this government. In-work poverty at 4 million people, homelessness soaring. Yesterday, in my city of Norwich and Norfolk, 38 out of 53 of our children's centres are being closed. Why? Because Norfolk County Council have said this government's cuts are forcing that on them. A day of complete shame in my city. And without a hint of irony, this government, whilst closing down our children's centres, has declared Norwich an opportunity area as it attempts to improve failing social mobility. Mr Speaker, it's a policy akin to attempting to fit up a bath with no plug. In education, schools face real terms funding cuts. In The Guardian today, Norfolk County Council again in the media, under fire from the local government ombudsman for failing to address and to look after the concerns of children with special education needs. On mental health, after the PM personally promised to improve this Cinderella service, Norfolk and Suffolk Mental Health Foundation Trust has been put into special measures again, 3 times in 4 years. The first of any trust in the country that has happened to. Real terms funding at this day and age now down 13%, demand up by 50%. But I also want to turn to an issue that I believe this House and particularly this government have failed to adequately address, and that's the impending climate catastrophe and biodiversity loss. This, above all else, given the timescales that we are talking, is basically a calamity waiting to happen that this government is comprehensively failing on. Time after time, we hear the greenwash from the benches opposite that they are going to do what it takes to do on the environment. They slash soda subsidies, 9,000 job losses. Fracking has been announced and put forward and is now actually happening. But not just in this country, they're also doing it in China as well with taxpayers' money. The climate science tells us that you need to leave this in the ground, 80% of it. It can't happen. And in the words of that famous Delia Smith, that legend of Norwich, I will say to the benches opposite, let's be having ya, let's have that general election, let's have that vote, support this motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are moments in this chamber for political knockabout. There are moments in this chamber for consensus. And there are moments in this chamber for constructive debate. And I am very, very disappointed that at this point in time, when we have such an important, momentous decision to make about how we take forwards our exit from the European Union, we are having this debate today. But I appreciate that yesterday's vote is the reason why it's been called. But what would make this maybe slightly better would be if it wasn't the fact the Leader of the Opposition hasn't just called this debate now, but all he said for weeks and weeks and months, whenever he's been asked his position on Brexit, he's been unable to give a clear answer. All he's been able to do is say he wants a general election. And he continues. I sincerely hope that after this evening, when I believe he will lose this vote, he will move on and start giving some clarity on his position on Brexit. But it is simply not fair to the country that the opposition cannot put together their own position. At this point in time, when I recognise that here in Parliament we need to come together and solve how we leave the European Union. That is what businesses, particularly my constituents, are calling for us to do, is move forward and get on with it. But also what I hear from businesses more often than not is not that their concern is so much about the uncertainty of Brexit, it's what would happen if the Leader of the Opposition were to become Prime Minister, and if his party and his hard left version of Labour were to take charge of our economy and our country, because that would be the worst possible thing for our country. I would have no confidence on behalf of my constituents of what he and his government would do for our economy, our security, or even for our public services. He may claim to be a champion of our public services. Not only would they be completely unsustainable, unfundable under his economic model, but also have no confidence that he'd be able to improve their performance as we have in government, whether it's in schools, where children are now learning to read, which is the fundamentals for them having a better opportunity in life, whether it's in the National Health Service, where, as we heard last week, we now have a long-term plan for a sustainable National Health Service and funded sustainably. So I look forward to for us to continue delivering on these commitments in government. But first, we need to move on and deliver Brexit. These are difficult times, not just in the UK, but for countries across the Western world. We need to come together, we need to move forward, we need to deliver on Brexit, continue making Britain a better place to live, and build our place in the world outside the European Union.
Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of the Leader of the Opposition's motion. As a teacher and head teacher throughout my career, trust has always been very important to me. The trust children had in me as their teacher and the trust that teachers had in me as their head teacher to understand their needs and make the right decisions on their behalf. Trust in relationships and in the workplace is crucial. Today, this debate isn't about whether the Prime Minister has the ability to make decisions on our behalf. It's about whether we trust her to understand the mood of the country, the zeitgeist, and the needs of every region and demographic, and make the right decisions. This government has suffered the biggest parliamentary defeat in history, been found in contempt of Parliament, overseen the steepest rise in poverty, and averaged a resignation per month. I trust the leader of our opposition and the shadow front bench as people who understand the struggles that many in our country are facing. I trust them to have the compassion and intellect to understand and empathise with the people of this country and to be able to make the decisions which will improve all our lives. Is the Prime Minister a good public servant? Yes. Does she work hard? Yes. Do I respect her? Yes. I respect anyone who devotes their life to public service. But is the Prime Minister a diplomat? Does she show warmth and empathy? Is she able to negotiate with the other 27 countries in the EU in our interests? Clearly not. I don't trust our Prime Minister to represent our country and to negotiate a deal which is in the best interest of the people of Combe Valley, my constituents, or our country. For me, this is not just about whether we are in the EU or not. It's about the kind of society I want my granddaughter to live in.
Absolutely.
Just before Christmas, my 5-year-old granddaughter came into Parliament for the first time and she loved it. Fast forward 30 years when she's a grown woman. Do I want her to inherit the world determined by this government? No, I don't. I wonder how she will judge this government's handling of Brexit when she's a grown woman. I see it as a full-blown display of incompetence focused purely on party interests and failing to take strong action to protect jobs and the economy, workers' rights and environmental protections and national security. I don't trust this government with my constituents' future, my granddaughter's future or our country's future. I have therefore no confidence in this government. I do trust a person like the opposition leader to understand diplomacy.
Thank you. Jack Brereton.
Speaker, when I was elected, my constituents in Stoke-on-Trent South were quite clear. They voted overwhelmingly for Brexit and they were overwhelmingly in rejection of what this Labour Party has become and what it now stands for. The Momentum-led Labour Party does not represent predominantly working-class communities like mine in the Midlands and the North. Years of Labour has done nothing to improve my city in Stoke-on-Trent, quite the reverse, decimating our local industries with our local communities taking the brunt and being left behind. Since Conservatives came to power, Stoke-on-Trent's industries have started to blossom again, with record numbers of people working and the best places to start a new business now being Stoke-on-Trent. This success is thanks to, yes, the hard work of our businesses and our communities, but most significantly, the policies of Conservatives. We have seen a government that has transformed our economy from the ruins of Labour's crash to one of the most successful developed economies. By supporting local businesses to grow, invest and take on more people, we have seen over 3.4 million more people in work, with unemployment at a record low, measures to keep taxes low and introducing a national living wage. A basic rate taxpayer is now over £1,200, better off than they were in 2010.
Order. The Honourable Gentleman, I know that the House is excited, but the Honourable Gentleman must get a respectful hearing. Jack Brereton.
Mr. Speaker, we must continue to pursue measures which will help address the cost of living and focus on growing aspirations, creating better opportunities and job prospects for our communities. This would be threatened by a Labour government led by the Leader of the Opposition. Their unfunded plans of £1 trillion of extra spending would see us racking up huge debts and mean massive tax rises for people in constituencies like mine who can least afford. And for what? Ideologically motivated white elephants, nationalisations of our industries, raiding the public purse to pursue policies which have been tried and failed time and again, threatening jobs in our industries and our economic prosperity. Every time we've had a Labour government, they have left our country with more people out of work than they started. And as I've said many times before, my constituency in Stoke-on-Trent South voted overwhelmingly to leave. At every opportunity, I have voted in this House to enact Brexit and deliver for the wishes of my constituents. For this House to go against that, and the British public, and most of my constituents voted for, would be a total betrayal of democracy. But this is what the significant proportion of MPs on the benches opposite want. They have repeatedly voted for measures to thwart Brexit, frustrating and trying to prevent and delay us from leaving on the 29th of March. This motion today shows the Labour leadership would rather play party politics than put the national interest in our country first. The Labour leader has been clear. They want a general election, going against the majority who are fed up with politicians and want us to get on with delivering for our country.
Paul Sweeney!
When I think of the confidence I have in this government, I think about how it's treated the most vulnerable people in our country. And when I think of my constituents, I think of a 10-year-old boy who was orphaned when his mother died, and this government, instead of nurturing him and trying to care for him and provide him with security, threatened to deport him. I thought that was a most shameful act, a disgrace, and is typical of this government's hostile environment policy. And that is why I have no confidence in this government, for that and many other reasons, about how it's treated my constituents and many vulnerable people across this country, but also how they have handled this negotiation in such a feckless and dysfunctional manner. They couldn't agree ahead of time what the negotiating objectives were. There was no spirit of collaboration. Even after the Prime Minister lost her majority in this place, there was no attempt to form a collegiate basis to agree negotiating objectives for this country and to deliver for this country's national interest. That was not achieved. Indeed, this government has subverted democracy at every turn when it suited its interests, even though it does not command a majority of the popular consent of the people or even a majority in this House of Commons. It has packed its select committees with Tory majorities, even though it is a hung parliament, by procedural sleight of hand. It repeatedly seeks to circumvent or abuse the Seal Conventions in its dealings with the devolved administrations. And indeed, this government became the first administration in parliamentary history to be held in contempt of Parliament. Happy to give way to my honourable friend.
Does my honourable friend agree that in Scotland people will be watching this thinking it's an absolute shambles? It's been absolutely roughshod over, and we have no trust, no faith at all in this government. We need a general election now.
We absolutely need a general election because there is no way to clear this impasse. There is a clear lack of faith in the government. There is a clear lack of will from the government to engage productively in reaching out to build a national consensus to achieve the way forward. It is now the job of Parliament to take control, and the only way to do that is to reset the clock, have a general election, allow a new mandate to be formed in the interests of delivering for the people of this country. That is the only way to do it, and that is why I'll be supporting the motion of the Leader of the Opposition tonight to bring down this failing government and deliver a mandate that will act in the national interests of this country.
Yes, 1 minute. 2 minutes. Luke Graham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'll try and keep this very short. I rise tonight in support of this government motion, mainly because I hear the frustrations of the people in this country from my constituents, and we hear it here in this House. There is confusion, whether it is on our split party position, we're criticised for red lines, but all we hear from Labour are their blurred lines, their lack of clear direction, their inability to come with a constructive alternative to what the government is being put forward. Mr. Speaker, parties of all colours failed to make a constructive case for the United Kingdom's position in the European Union. And many contributions we've heard in this chamber this afternoon have lamented that fact. Many of them have been driven by anger, and that's fine. Anger is an easy emotion, and it's one that many of our constituents feel. But when party politics fail and policies fall down is when MPs need to step up. And that's what we need to do in the coming weeks. What's come from the defeat last night is a clear determination from my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, to reach out across this chamber, to come back with different proposals, to listen to people from across the political spectrum, and not those who stand up in this chamber and say they work in the national interest, but they only work in the nationalist interest, but actually those MPs who are here to genuinely serve their constituents and protect and preserve our United Kingdom. Mr. Speaker, it is incredibly easy to criticise, but we cannot abdicate our responsibilities as members of Parliament for what we were elected to do. Our constituents don't want another general election, they want us to get on with our jobs.
Tom Watson!
Mr. Speaker, this has been a very passionately argued debate with over, as at my count, 59 members giving speeches where they were not holding back. And the scene was set by the Honourable Member for Christchurch, who said at the start that the Prime Minister must accept the verdict of the House last night. And the necessity for that was underpinned by my right honourable friend, the member for Knowsley, who highlighted the fact that she is a Prime Minister with no majority and no authority, which is perhaps why the honourable member for Ross, Skye and Lochaber talked about the PM's record level of a lack of humility, and the right honourable member for Twickenham, in what I thought was a thoughtful speech, spoke of the government's arrogant approach to these negotiations. Why is that so important? Because, as my honourable friend, the member for Wallasey, said, the UK is more divided and fearful for the future than ever before. Now, we have had some comic moments in this debate. I was particularly amused by the honourable member for Mid-Norfolk's contribution, his Life of Brian speech, which is an homage to one of the greatest satirical farces in British film history, very appropriate for the times we are in. And the honourable member for Brentford and Ongar talked about the Conservative Party rebonding in the long lobbies tonight. Now, I can't fail to note the passionate and sometimes breathless critiques of the last 9 years of austerity economics by colleagues on my side of the House, particularly the members for Gedling, Ilford North, Warrington North, Hull West and Hessel. And a special prize must go to the honourable member for Dudley South, who at very short notice gave a 4-minute speech in 3 minutes by speaking 25% faster. Now, Mr. Speaker, as the Prime Minister said earlier in this debate, this is a crucial moment in our nation's history. But it is an unenviable task to summarise this debate today and to ask members of this House to pass judgment on her stewardship of our country. First, let me say very clearly that I am not one of those people who questions her motives. I agree with the honourable member for Stirling, who claimed she was motivated by public duty. I don't doubt that she has sincerely attempted to fulfil the task given to us by the voters in this referendum. I have no doubt, too, that she has tried her best and given it her all. But she has failed. And I'm afraid the failure is hers. And it's hers alone. And I'm certain that every member of this House admires her resilience. To suffer the humiliations on a global stage that she has done would have finished off weaker people far sooner. Yet the reality is that if the Prime Minister really sat down and thought carefully about the implications of that defeat last night for our country, she would have resigned. Throughout history, Prime Ministers have tried their best and failed. There's no disgrace in that. That's politics. But this Prime Minister has chosen one last act of defiance, not just defying the laws of politics, but defying the laws of mathematics. And it was Disraeli who said, "A majority is always better than the best repartee." She is a Prime Minister without a majority for her flagship policy, with no authority and no plan B. 432 to 202. Mr. Speaker, that is not a mere flesh wound. No one doubts her determination, which is generally an admirable quality, but misapplied it can be toxic. And the cruelest truth of all is that she doesn't possess the necessary skills, the political skills, the empathy, the ability, and most crucially, the policy to lead this country any longer. Now, I know there are many good people in the government. They will be examining their consciences as the clock runs down on these Brexit negotiations. Because she has refused to resign, we now face a choice between a general election to sort out this mess or continued paralysis under her leadership. But now the ante has been raised. The government has been defeated on a Brexit plan that has been its sole reason for existing for the past 2.5 years. It has not just been defeated on the most crucial issue facing our country, it has suffered the worst defeat of any British government in history. And the clock is ticking. MPs have shown that they're ready to take back control over what has been, from start to finish, a failed Brexit process. But the question facing the House tonight is whether it is worth giving this failed Prime Minister another chance to go back pleading to Brussels, another opportunity to humiliate the United Kingdom, another few weeks to waste precious time. Our answer tonight must be a resounding no. And let me remind you why. It was this Prime Minister who chose to lay down red lines that never commanded the support of Parliament. It was this Prime Minister who refused to guarantee the rights of EU nationals who've made their lives and their homes in this country. It was this Prime Minister who time and again tried to shut Parliament out, refusing to give us a meaningful vote, refusing to release the legal advice to the deal. She's treated this place and its members on all sides with utter disdain. Mr. Speaker, it was the member for Gainsborough who said the road to tyranny is paved with executives ignoring Parliament. Yet that is what she has done. And so Parliament is having to assert its rightful authority. And at every turn, she has chosen division over unity. She's not tried to bring the 17 million people that voted Leave and the 16 million people that voted Remain together. She should have tried to assure those who voted Remain. Instead, she chose to placate the most extreme of her colleagues on the Leave side of the debate. That has left the nation more divided than it was in June 2016. Out on the streets, in homes, in schools, in hospitals, people are struggling and take no hope and no strength from this ailing government. What happened to those burning injustices she said it was her mission to fight when she came into office? Racism, classism, homelessness, insecure jobs. They've all grown and burned brighter than ever before. And for so much of this, she is responsible. If the House declares its no confidence in the government tonight, it will open the possibility of a general election and a decisive change in direction for our country on Brexit, a decisive change in direction for workers, for young people and for our vital services. Mr. Speaker, the Right Honourable Lady will forever be known as the nothing has changed Prime Minister. But something must change. So our only choice left is to change her and her government in a general election. We know she's worked hard, but the truth is she's too set in her ways, too aloof to lead. She lacks the imagination and agility to bring people with her. She lacks the authority on the world stage to negotiate this deal. Ultimately, she has failed. It's not through lack of effort. It's not through lack of dedication. And I think the country recognises that effort. In fact, the country feels genuinely sorry for the Prime Minister. I feel sorry for the Prime Minister. But she cannot confuse pity for political legitimacy, sympathy for sustainable support. The evidence is clear. And I know that out of loyalty to party, members opposite will want to support the Prime Minister in the vote this evening. But everyone in this chamber, no matter which lobby they go through tonight, know in their hearts that this Prime Minister is not capable of getting a deal through. The members on the opposite benches know it. They know, we know that they know it. The country knows it, which is why we must act. That is why we need something new. That is why we need a general election. I commend this motion to the House.
Mr. Speaker, as you know, having sat throughout this entire debate, it has been a passionate debate characterised by many excellent speeches, and I commend the members for Tiverton and Honiton, Bolton West, East Surrey, Mid Norfolk, Plymouth Moor View, Broxtowe, Stirling, Dudley South, Faversham and Stoke-on-Trent South on my side for a series of outstanding speeches. Yeah. But it has also been the case, as the Shadow Secretary of State pointed out, that there have been many powerful speeches from the opposition benches as well. And I too, like him, want to pay particular tribute to the members for Warrington North, Gedling, Ilford North and Birmingham Hodge Hill for moving and passionate speeches. Their constituencies are lucky to have them as advocates for their concerns and their needs. But perhaps the bravest and the finest speech that came from the opposition benches was given by the member for Barrow in Furness. It takes courage. It takes courage, and he has it, having been elected on a Labour mandate, representing working-class people, to say that the leader of the party that you joined as a boy is not fit to be Prime Minister. He speaks for his constituents. He speaks for the country. And that takes me to the speech from the Shadow Secretary of State. He spoke well. He spoke well, but I felt he did not rise to the level of events. But one thing that was characteristic about his speech, he did not once mention in his speech the leader of the opposition or why he should be Prime Minister. Now, he doesn't want him to be Prime Minister. I have a lot of time for the honourable member. We have several things in common. He's lost weight recently. Sorry, we've both lost weight recently, I should say. Him much more so. We're both friends of Israel. Him much more so. And we both recognise that the member for Islington North is about the worst possible person to lead the Labour Party. Him much more so. Now, as well as great speeches from the backbenches, we also had some interesting speeches from the front benches. We had a speech of over 20 minutes from my great friend, the leader of the Scottish National Party in this place. But again, in those 20 minutes, he did not once mention the common fisheries policy. I think everyone in Scotland who recognises the potential to free ourselves from the common fisheries policy which Brexit provides will note that in 20 minutes of precious parliamentary time, the SNP didn't mention them, aren't interested in them, and as far as the fishing people of Scotland are concerned, the SNP have literally nothing to say. I turn to the speech from the leader of the Liberal Democrats, someone whom I also have affection and respect for, and he made a number of good points. But he also said that he regretted the referendum. This from the party that was the first in this House to say that we should have a referendum on EU membership. And because he doesn't like the result of the last referendum, he now wants another referendum. The Liberal Democrat policy on referendums is not the policy of Gladstone or Lloyd George, it's the policy of Vicky Pollard. No, but yeah, but no, but yeah. I should also commend the speech given by the leader of the Democratic Unionist Party. He explained that he had been inundated with text messages today from people who were saying, please, 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 people in this House, please, please, please back the government tonight. And some of those text messages had even come from Conservatives. And I think, critically, when we think about confidence in this country and in this government, there is a daily vote of confidence which is being executed by the individuals investing in this country, creating jobs and opportunity for all our citizens. Under this government, this country remains the most successful country for foreign direct investment of any country in Europe, with more than £1.3 billion being invested in the last year. That is why Forbes magazine says that this country is the best destination for new jobs in the world. It's why the independent organisation JLL say the best place for the future of services in the world is here in the United Kingdom. It is why once again London has been recorded by independent inspectors as the best place in the world for tech investment. And we see that when Spanish rail firms like Talgo shortlist 6 destinations for investment for new rolling stock, all 6 in the United Kingdom. When Boeing opened a new factory in Sheffield to create jobs for British workers. When Chanel moved from France to London in order to establish a new corporate headquarters.
Smells good.
And when Starbucks moved from Amsterdam to London in order to ensure more investment and jobs. The opposition should wake up and smell the coffee. And all of this, in the words of the BBC, despite Brexit. Now that investment, those jobs that have been created under my right honourable friend the Prime Minister's inspirational leadership, has been invested in public services and social justice. As we heard from the member for Dudley South and Bexhill in Battle, 1.9 million more children in good and outstanding schools. It is also the case that the gap between the poorest and the richest in our schools has narrowed under this Conservative government. We also have a record level of investment in the NHS, and thanks to my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Health, a 10-year plan, £20 billion investment, £394 million extra every week for our NHS. And we also have investment in our national security. We meet the 2% target for investment in NATO, and we have 2 new aircraft carriers capable of projecting British force and influence across the world in defence of freedom and democracy. And in contrast, while we are standing up for national security, what about the right honourable gentleman, the member for Islington North? He wants to leave NATO. He wants to get rid of our nuclear deterrent. And recently in a speech he said, why do countries boast about the size of their armies? That is quite wrong. Why don't we emulate Costa Rica that has no army at all? No allies, no deterrent, no army. No way can this country ever allow that man to be our Prime Minister and in charge of our national security. But if he can't support our fighting men and women, no. Who does he support? Who does he stand beside? Well, it was fascinating to discover that the right honourable gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition, was there when a wreath was laid. A wreath was laid to commemorate those who were involved in the massacre at the Munich Olympics of Israeli athletes. Now, he says he was present but not involved. Present but not involved sums him up when it comes to national security. When this House voted to bomb the fascists of ISIS after an inspirational speech by the member for Leeds Central, in which 66 people, including the Shadow Secretary of State, voted with this government in order to defeat fascism, I'm afraid that the honourable gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition, was not with us. In fighting fascism, he was present but not involved. And similarly, when this House voted to take the action necessary, when Vladimir Putin executed an act of terrorism on our soil, there were many Labour members, many good Labour members, who stood up to support what we were doing, but not the right honourable gentleman when we were fighting Vladimir.
Point of order, Daniel Rennie. If it is a genuine point of order.
The government, how is this relevant? And is this not dangerous?
If the Secretary of State were out of order, I'd have said so. I didn't, because he isn't. Secretary of State.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And if the Leader of the Opposition won't stand up against Putin when he attacks people in this country, if he won't stand up against fascists when they are running riot in Syria, if he will not stand up for this country when critical national security questions are being asked, how can we possibly expect him to stand up for us in European negotiations? Will he stand up for us against Spain over Gibraltar? Will he stand up against the Commission in order to ensure that we get a good deal? Of course he won't, because he won't even stand up for his own members of Parliament. Why is it that a Labour Member of Parliament needs armed protection at her own party conference? Why is it that nearly half of female Labour MPs wrote to the Leader of the Opposition to say that he was not standing up against the vilification and the abuse that they received online, which was being carried out in his name? If he cannot protect his own Members of Parliament, if he cannot protect the proud traditions of the Labour Party, how can he possibly protect this country? We cannot have confidence in him to lead. We have confidence in this government, which is why I commend this motion.
Order! Under the order of the House! Under the order of the House of today, I am now required to put the question. The question is that this House has no confidence in Her Majesty's government. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Division! Clear the lobby! Order. The question is that this House has no confidence in Her Majesty's government. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tellers for the ayes, Jessica Morden and Jeff Smith. Tellers for the noes, Julian Smith and Christopher Pincher.
The ayes to the right, 306. The noes to the left, 325.
The ayes to the right, 306. The noes to the left, 325. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock. Point of order, the Prime Minister.
On a point of order, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased that this House has expressed its confidence in the government tonight. I do not take this responsibility lightly, and my government will continue its work to increase our prosperity, guarantee our security, and to strengthen our union. And yes, we will also continue to work to deliver on the solemn promise we made to the people of this country to deliver on the result of the referendum and leave the European Union. I believe this duty is shared by every member of this House, and we have a responsibility to identify a way forward that can secure the backing of the House. To that end, I've proposed a series of meetings between senior parliamentarians and representatives of the government over the coming days, and I would like to invite the leaders of parliamentary parties to meet with me individually, and I would like to start these meetings tonight. Mr. Speaker, the government approaches these meetings in a constructive spirit, and I urge others to do the same. But we must find solutions that are negotiable and command sufficient support in this House. And, as I've said, we will return to the House on Monday to table an amendable motion and to make a statement about the way forward. The House has put its confidence in this government. I stand ready to work with any member of this House to deliver on Brexit and ensure that this House retains the confidence of the British people.
Point of order, Mr. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last night the House rejected the government's conclusion of its negotiations with the European...
Order. I called the Prime Minister on a point of order, and the Prime Minister was heard. And she was heard in relative tranquility and certainly with courtesy. And the same courtesy will be extended to the Leader of the Opposition and to others who seek to raise points of order. That's the way it is. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last night, the House rejected the government's deal, emphatically. A week ago, the House voted to condemn the idea of a no-deal Brexit. Before there can be any positive discussions about the way forward, the government must remove clearly, once and for all, the prospect of the catastrophe of a no-deal Brexit from the EU and all the chaos that would come as a result of that. And I invite the Prime Minister to confirm now that the government will not countenance a no-deal Brexit from the European Union.
A point of order, Mr. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I must say that I welcome the offer of talks from the Prime Minister. I think it's important, Mr. Speaker, that all of us recognise the responsibility that we have, and on the back of the defeat of the government's motion last night, that we have to work together where we can to find a way forward. I commit the Scottish National Party to working constructively with the government. However, I do think it's important. I do think it is important in that regard that we make it clear to the Prime Minister, in the spirit of openness in these talks, that the issue of extending Article 50 of a people's vote and avoiding a no deal have to be on the table. We have to agree to enter these talks on the basis that we can move forward and achieve a result which will unify all the nations of the United Kingdom.
Thank you. Point of order, Sir Edward Davey, and then I'll come to the right honourable gentleman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. From the Liberal Democrat position, we are clear that we want to engage with talks with Her Majesty's government. But it's very important that the government makes clear that no deal is not an option. it's very, very important that the Prime Minister, as she actually, to be fair to her, earlier today didn't do, rule out extending Article 50. It's important that the House has that chance to think and come together. And finally, I would ask the Prime Minister, will she ensure, Mr. Speaker, that this House gets a chance to take control of our own business as we go through the next few days and weeks?
Thank you. Point of order, Mr. Nigel Dodds.
Mr. Speaker, and the result of the motion of no confidence tonight illustrates the importance of the confidence and supply arrangement that is currently in place between. I'm always delighted when our opponents illustrate the strength of that relationship that we have and what it's delivering for Northern Ireland. And when the people of Northern Ireland see that investment in education and health and infrastructure, they will thank this Parliament and they will thank this party and this government for that extra investment. But can I say this? Can I say this?
Order, Mr. Stone. Normally, order. Very unseemly behaviour. Normally you behave with great dignity in this place. Calm yourself, man. Get a grip. Nigel Dodds.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Can I say, however, that the confidence and supply arrangement, of course, is built upon delivering Brexit on the basis of our shared priorities. And for us, that is the Union. And we want to deliver Brexit, taking back control of our laws, our border and our money, and we leave the European Union as one country. Let us work in the coming days to achieve that objective.
Well, on ground, well, if the right honourable gentleman really feels he must, but he has been represented by his right honourable friend. But if he really wants to, briefly, I don't mind. But we really must move. No. Well, the generosity of spirit, Mr. Alistair Carmichael.
For her assurance, Mr. Speaker, that the motion that will be brought on Monday will be amendable. And can I seek your guidance about how we, on this side of the House, and indeed on that side of the House as well, who want to see this matter put to a people's vote, might on Monday be given the opportunity to do so, including the opportunity given to the Leader of the Opposition, now that we know there is not to be a general election?
Response to the right honourable gentleman, apart from thanking him for his point of order, is to say that if there is an amendable motion of which the Prime Minister on behalf of the government has given notice, manifestly there will be an opportunity for people to table amendments, and we shall have then to see what happens. The right honourable gentleman wouldn't expect me to make a commitment in advance, but I know what he thinks and I've heard what he said. We come now to the adjournment. The whip to move.
I beg to move this House to now adjourn.
Thank you. The question is that this House do now adjourn. Honourable members do not wish to hear the honourable gentleman, the member for Solihull, dilate on the matter of car production in Solihull, which seems an unaccountable choice on their part. I hope that they will leave the chamber quickly and quietly so that the occupant of the chair can hear the honourable gentleman deliver his oration.
Thank you.
We must have been. What that makes one of us. Yeah. Do you want to intervene? That's no problem. So I'll
Yeah, we
We come now to the adjournment, when I can divert the whip from the attention of his honourable friend, the member for Mid-Bedfordshire, who's whispering into his ear, no doubt extremely meaningfully. But if I can just distract him for a moment. We come now to the adjournment. The whip to move.
I beg to move this House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. Mr. Julian Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And we move finally on to the main business of the day. And it is, obviously, it's a great pleasure to have followed the Secretary of State for DEFRA, and I'm sure that this speech will be as resounding as that one. It's not a hard act to follow, after all, is it? I have to give that fantastic oration. The reason for this debate, and I secured it prior to the announcements of job reductions at Jaguar Land Rover in the West Midlands. I got the beforehand, but we've seen a slow trend over time, unfortunately, over the last year, of a drip of job losses in the Jaguar Land Rover group. And the announcements that have just been made were much more substantial in that regard, and has brought forward the Jaguar Land Rover Development Partnership, which I'm sure all honourable members, and I know my right honourable friend, the member for Meriden, is playing a leading part in that, and also in the work in this House in terms of promoting the needs of the UK car industry and Jaguar Land Rover in particular. I'm sure all honourable members, and also the member for Coventry South, will join me in wishing that organisation a great success. Hear, hear. Now, I believe that in order to take the right action to support the British car industry and the towns and families that depend on it, politicians must have an accurate understanding of the real drivers behind the current challenges and not allow this issue to get caught up in arguments over, for example, Brexit. I therefore want to use my speech to set out why Jaguar Land Rover is so important to Solihull and the wider West Midlands economy, and the real reasons behind their current difficulties, and set out my recommendations for what ministers can do to support this crucial industry. Solihull is rightly proud of the fact that it is one of the UK's great manufacturing towns. Not only is it home to some of the country's most popular global brands, but as I said in the House just the other day, it is one of only a few constituencies to enjoy an actual trade surplus in goods with the European Union. As a consequence, thousands of local residents are employed in these industries, including the JLR plant at Lode Lane, and they have played a big role in shaping the character shape of our town. I'm delighted to give way to the gentleman.
Yeah, and first of all, congratulate him on bringing this forward and understand the reasons for it, and it's good to see the members who have a particular interest in that to be here in the House as well. Similar to us in Northern Ireland when it comes to the Bombardier issue, does the honourable member agree that consideration must be given to bringing back work from foreign plants, such an example such as Slovakia in the case of Land Rover, and keeping jobs here in the United Kingdom, similar as it should be doing in Bombardier? And does he think a government should look at the incentives to encourage the retention of jobs here within the big manufacturing base in the United Kingdom?
I thank the honourable gentleman for making the intervention, and I think the way in which you keep jobs and actually bring jobs into the UK is by creating the business environment for them to flourish and investment to flourish, and that is basically the point of the speech that I'm going to make. This I will give him.
Gentleman for giving way, and I congratulate him on securing this timely debate. He's quite right. There's not a lot can be said about meetings that we've had with Jaguar Land Rover, because that information is confidential. But Jaguar Land Rover is not in the same situation as Bombardier. It's a totally different situation, quite frankly. And what we certainly want to do is support the honourable gentleman, as he knows, and to make sure that Jaguar Land Rover goes on and creates more jobs. And I'm sure he might want to touch on the supply line, because I've had a number of letters from small companies, a bit concerned about it, but we've had some reassurances on that, and there'll be discussions about that anyway. So, all the best to the honourable gentleman.
Honourable gentleman for his intervention, and actually, I wonder whether he's actually seen my speech, actually, because I'm just about to mention the actual successes of the Jaguar Land Rover, which are manifest over this time. And actually, when you think in terms of employment, and we just talked about that, I talked about that at the start of this particular speech, the realities are that we have gone back to the situation we were in 2016.
I congratulate my honourable friend on securing this important debate tonight. And just want to say, I have a feeling I know what he's going to say, and that he has in what he says huge and strong support from my constituents in the royal town of Sutton Coldfield for the critical importance that Jaguar Land Rover plays in our region.
Intervention. I know for a fact there's a lot of people who work at Jaguar Land Rover that live in his constituency, and I always see the royal town of Sutton Coldfield effectively as very close partners with Solihull in many things and many respects, and I do welcome and thank him for his comment. JLR does face serious challenges, but I think it's not important not to allow these to eclipse what is still a very encouraging overall picture. In 2010, they employed just 12,000 people in the UK, whereas even after the latest reductions, they will still employ over 38,000 workers across the country, including 10,000 in Solihull. That's more than a threefold increase nationwide. Those 8 years have also seen substantial revenue growth, from 6 billion to 25 billion per year, a more than fourfold increase. Over the past 5 years, JLR has invested some £80 billion in the UK, which is basically the same as defence and education put together. That is an enormous investment. They further announced a fresh round of investment alongside the job news last week. Overall, the UK continues to enjoy the most productive automotive manufacturing sector in Europe, and productivity remains about 50% higher than the British manufacturing average. In short, Solihull remains a great place for British manufacturers and exporters, and I'll do everything I can to help them succeed as part of the new Jaguar Land Rover Development Partnership. I also think that we must be careful the details of this important issue aren't confused or obscured. There is no doubt that our relationship with the European Union is a matter of serious concern to JLR and every other manufacturer who depends on international just-in-time supply chains. But JLR management have been quite clear that the driving forces behind the current reductions are twofold: a serious fall in demand in China and a slump in demand for diesel cars in the aftermath of the Volkswagen emissions scandal. Exposure to downturns in foreign markets is part and parcel of being an exporter, but the second is the fallout from the Volkswagen emissions scandal, a problem made in Wolfsburg, but now threatening jobs and investment in the UK. For years, governments of both parties have encouraged Britons to buy diesel, and by extension, encouraged British car makers to surface that need. According to Professor David Bailey of Aston Business School, more than 90% of JLR's domestic sales are diesels. Yet after Volkswagen were found to have been fiddling with their emission scores, we have suddenly seen a scramble to seem to crack down on diesel. This has had the predictable results. So far this year, Jaguar sales have been down 26%, but this pattern is repeated across the UK car industry, where overall diesel registrations have plunged by a third since January to March 2017. Respected economists from the Centre for Economic and Business Research have shown that such policies are hugely detrimental to the economy. Many of these policies also fail to account for the huge differences between old-fashioned diesel engines and so-called, if you like, cleaner diesel, alternatives to the sort manufactured by Jaguar Land Rover in my constituency. These cars are just as clean as petrol alternatives. In fact, What Car magazine recently named a diesel their car of the year, saying that not only that it combined the low CO2 diesels are known for, but with lower NOx output than many petrol alternatives. Even better, and this is perverse in many respects. The fact is, so many people are now switching to petrol without realising they could be actually buying a more polluting vehicle than the diesel they could actually buy at the same time, perhaps at a good discount. I will give way to my round friend.
Very grateful, and very briefly.